Priorities Committee meeting for November 1st. This is going to be the first meeting of our council for this term. I see we have some new faces also at the table. So before we get into it, I just want to remind everyone as a bit of housekeeping that in accordance to our procedural bylaw 2020-15, presentation of delegations will be granted 15 minutes for presentation and questions. Council will then after that process is done, council will then accept for information and or direct administration to bring back to a further council meeting for further direction. So, having said that, I would like to call this morning's meeting to order. And I would ask at this point in time if there are any added items to the agenda. Seeing none, I will ask for an adoption then of today's agenda. Mayor Dahl.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I would like so move the minutes. Sorry? No. Where am I here? Okay. Thank you. I'm so move and accept the minutes as agenda as presented for November 1st, 2021.
Thanks you so much.
I feel so different in this cubicle, sorry.
That's fine. All in favor, I will call for the vote then. Okay, agenda is passed. Moving along to number 2, adoption of the previous minutes from the Policies and Priority Committee meeting. May I have someone move those minutes, please? Sorry, Councillor Ryan, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I move that we adopt the minutes from the October 4th, 2021 Committee of Council Policies and Priorities meeting as presented.
Thanks you so much. Are there any errors or omissions at this time? I know it's rather difficult for all you, the new council members, but if you were able to review it online or review the minutes. Any corrections in it anyway? Seeing none, I will move then that we adopt the minutes from the previous council meeting as presented. That is passed. Thank you so much. We will now move into reports and statistics. And I see first up we will have the Olds RCMP Detachment Quarterly Review. Director Wagstaff, would you like to introduce, please?
Please, if Staff Sergeant sorry, I was going to say Warren, but that's not your last name, Warren. Wright, Staff Sergeant Wright, please join us.
We're live. Well, thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to see you and new faces, of course. And welcome to Scott. Okay, so last time I reported to the previous council, I had just arrived here, and the information I was reporting on I wasn't actually terribly responsible for because I was still in High Prairie. That being said, this quarter, which again, the RCMP are a little bit different in that we treat this as a second quarter report. The town might look at it as third because you go by the calendar year. RCMP have to be different. We go by a fiscal year which starts in April and ends in March. So we call this the second report. It is for the inclusive period of July 1st to September 30th. And again, all the information that's in here I can speak to because I was actually here and saw it happen. So the format that the Operational Strategy Branch in K Division gives us is a little bit different from years past. It comes in a very tidy, standard package, which is a letter addressed to the mayor, followed by some statistics, and then the report itself. In the report, we speak to our policing priorities that were provided to us by the town, but I'll get into those shortly. I don't know if council is interested in me actually reading this verbatim, but I mean, I can go through the highlights. I also like to point out before I begin that I brought Constable Morley Stachuk with me. That's Morley. Morley is our community resource officer. He is municipally funded through the town. And his role as community resources, well, he wears many, many different hats. And I help him with his hats because I like doing that work too. And it's mostly community engagement. It's being a liaison with different organizations such as the Youth Justice Committee, even OPAC to a degree, even though I'm also in OPAC, and Rural Crime Watch, Citizens on Patrol, and any other organizations, as well as he's in the schools, all the schools that are in town itself, and is also a liaison with Olds College. So I did describe basically what Morley was up to in July, August, and September. Now, with the schools being out for 2 of those months, certainly he was involved in our skate park, which is where a lot of the youth congregate, and sometimes I don't know, misbehave. Hard to say, right? But certainly he was there to provide a presence. Morley is currently out of uniform. He's in plain clothes. It's pretty much what he wears to work. He's not going to be in uniform for a while, but there's a medical reason at the moment for that. So yes, he was in the skate park. He has a program that he was working with Eric Christensen, the CPO, in terms of positive ticketing, which is rewarding good behavior from the youth. And there's also one for seniors. What's it called?
Operation Heat.
Heat.
Operation Freeze is a free Froster cold drink for youth because it's got sugar. Operation Heat would be a free coffee that's being promoted by Circle K Max for seniors or for other people who don't want a cold drink. So Operation Freeze and Operation Heat.
So there's enough of us in town that we do a lot of our fair share of enforcement, but he gets the nice job of handing people coupons. So, but he does more than that, of course. He also hosted with the fire department and Eric Christensen Get Your Bike Ready for School Day event, which was a bit of a modified bike rodeo, I guess. Children could bring their bikes to the fire hall, and there was a mechanic there that could service them and, fit their helmets properly, things like that, go over some rules of the road. He was also very instrumental in assisting with Fern Olson's 100th birthday party, just in terms of having police attendants to that to read the letter from the Prime Minister and Premier and Mayor. He's involved with the Olds Fire Department concerning their fire cadet program. He's the liaison member. That's just kind of up and running and off the ground. As well as the school year eased in, he started reviewing the VITRA program and the school lockdown procedures in the event that there is a school event that the police need to respond to. So he was just sharpening up everybody's skills and making sure we all speak the same language concerning that. Various presentations, that kind of thing. He did a lot to do with sort of the current topics of today, which is still vaping and e-scooters and different things that kids are into, TikTok challenges, stuff like that. Very well reported on by the school administration. They're incredibly happy to have him. He's very, I'll say this in front of his face, he's very, very personable, amicable, approachable constable. Certainly, I don't think that there's any fear or concerns approaching him and talking to him in the hallways. So, and as for me, I did a few things over the summer myself as well, just to contribute overall community engagement in terms of, yes, I met with some counselors to do with the Police Advisory Committee. I understand that that's changed a little bit. I do understand who is currently on the Police Advisory Committee, and looking forward to eventually having a meeting this month, I hope, and getting that going. So that's good. So I'm just kind of skimming here. Attended Red Surge to the grand opening of the Rotary Park behind Walmart. That was a very nice day. Attended to Fern Olson's 100th birthday party in Red Surge. I was the one that read the letter. Had a fairly good, made sure that there was fairly good presence during the federal election day, just in terms of any concerns because of COVID restrictions and whatnot. We didn't want any people reacting poorly at the polls and disrupting things. That's about it. Now, in terms of the priorities themselves, there are 4 priorities that were brought to the attention of the Olds detachment. First and foremost is crime reduction and targeting our habitual offenders. And one of the methodology that we've chosen to do is basically to those that are on curfews and conditions, those are the ones that reside in Olds, those are the ones we are focusing our attention on. There are 5 this last report. And from period to period, they will change because some actually either come off their conditions or some go to jail. So the numbers could change, but this last reporting period, there were 5, and of the 5, 28 checks were done on them, which I feel is very adequate. It just reminds them that they are under these conditions, and if they contravene them, then in all likelihood, they'll be going back into the system. Secondly is road safety impaired driving. Traffic strategies continue to develop with the town CPO as well as collaborative targeted efforts. That being said, members generated 57 tickets, that's for moving and non-moving violations, 3 criminal impaired driving charges, and 15 drivers that failed the mandatory alcohol screening process and were given immediate provincial sanctions. So I just want to speak to that. Historically, when we talk about impaired drivers, we would only talk about the criminal cases. And lately, the trend has been not so much to pursue everything criminally, but to pursue it provincially. And the sanctions are very much immediate. And so people are still being checked. In fact, I'm speaking to this quarter, not last quarter, which is why I'm here, but we just had a JFO with traffic services, the local RCMP detachment, and the CPO, and over 100 vehicles were stopped. And of the 100 vehicles that were stopped, you'll be happy to hear only 1 failed the mandatory alcohol screening. So people are very much in compliance with driving without being under the influence of alcohol and drug. Very happy to hear those stats. Third, community engagement. Kind of spoke to that already. Community Resource Officer Constable Morley Statchuk was busy through Q2 proactively addressing minor nuisance matters at the town skate park with youth, promoting bicycle safety, fraud prevention with seniors, the safe in vitro programs with schools, as well as speaking to GDL driving, vaping, e-scooter, moped related provincial legislation. Visibility. Olds detachment had 556 calls this last quarter for service in the town itself. Olds members continue to make their uniform presence within the town daily and nightly. I mean, that's the benefit of having the detachment here. We're in town all the time. And the majority of us live in the town itself. The Community Resource Officer, again, has been very active in his duties and visible as stated above. Meanwhile, I've also been involved to a degree in various other events that have happened. Okay. So that's a quarterly report based on the priorities. There are some statistics that were included by Edmonton, as well as there's a separate statistics package. I wasn't going to read the statistics out unless there's any questions arising from them.
No, thank you. I think that we've all had this information prior, so
All right.
I don't think you need to read it verbatim. If there's anything highlighting that you'd like to bring up, that would be appreciated, but otherwise then we can open it up for questions.
Sure.
Staff Sergeant Wright, if that's fine. All right, so are you good to go for questions then?
I mean, I can. I was going to finish up maybe with the last portion, which was just in terms of where we're at in terms of personnel.
Sure,
And then
certainly.
I guess
yeah.
we can go to questions? Okay.
Certainly, that would be great, thank you.
So, as opposed to the first quarter, which I reported on last time, to now, we are in extremely good shape with the vast majority of the members and employees working. A lot of our parental leaves and sick leaves have returned to work, so we're pretty much fully staffed with the exception of, we're still missing our sergeant. The sergeant has been advertised. My understanding is it went laterally first, so a sergeant from another posting would have to express their interest in coming here as a lateral sergeant. That being said, I can't tell you how many people applied or who's being considered, but there could be a likelihood that there are no suitable considerations for Olds and that they will be going promotionally. And if that is the case, then I will definitely notify council through your director.
Maybe you would like to just explain that position a little bit further, because the newer members of council may be not aware of what was passed in the past budget as far as that position.
Sure. Okay, so Olds Detachment is currently 15 members. There's 10 municipal and 5 provincial. Of the 10 municipal, I'm one of the municipal paid for members. My understanding is in the last year, council approved the creation of a new position, which is a sergeant. So I'm a staff sergeant, which means I'm at the top for the detachment. I'm the chief of police, the detachment commander. And then underneath me currently are 2 corporals. And those 2 corporals are supervisors over 12 constables. So what we've done is we've created an intermediary position between me, the detachment commander or the administrator, and the supervisors. And they're called an operations NCO. It's a sergeant's position, which means that it will allow the corporals to more time to get away from their computers and on the road and do actual direct supervision of the members in the field. Okay.
And you are now ready for questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll open up the floor. Mayor Dahl?
Thank you very much. Very good facts and information here. With regards to your skateboard park, I had a couple inquiries during election, and one of the ladies was suggesting or asking, once again, are there any thoughts, or do we have a youth group that meet and discuss anything? I know when we built it, it was almost like the youth were feeling like they were going to police it amongst themselves. They did a really good job for the first couple of years. The only question she had was that her child was much younger, and they felt that they got pushed to the side a lot and got a little bit bullied, and she gave some solutions. She thought maybe they could sell candy and that person could be a supervised position. But the first question would be then, is there a youth group that kind of meet, or is it just free for all?
Sorry, Director Wagstaff may have something to say.
I can speak to that, Your Worship. So, notwithstanding the fact that the last 2 years have been, difficult and challenging for us to meet with community groups, especially informal ones like that, one of the pieces that we did learn, during the closure of the skate park during COVID, is that the need to be able to meet informally, because there's an formalized group around the skate park. But we have, in community services, started to talk about how we can do an engagement with those groups, because it is a diverse group, as you see at the skate park, diverse both in age and in interest. And to include the RCMP in that, but have an engagement that we set up, and we looked at the fact that we're going to have to close the skate park again for some maintenance in early spring. To update it. We felt that was a good timing to be able to gather those groups, because there's a reason to sort of gather them and talk about, graffiti wall, behaviors at the skate park, improvements for that area, and be able to engage them that way. So we are moving in that direction, and one of the questions that we would have in there is there a willingness or a way to have a formalized group, or do we keep it informal and maybe make that more regular?
Supplemental, just something that I'm learning. What's the acronym for JFO?
I apologize. Joint Forces Operations, so it just means a collaborative effort between enforcement bodies.
Okay.
So JFO is typically in this town anyway are between the RCMP and the CPOs.
Okay, thank you very much.
We love our jargon.
Go ahead, my mic's off, so.
I had a question with regards to the Operation Freeze and Operation Heat. So is that solely the liaison with the RCMP and municipal enforcement that are giving those out, or do your regular officers also give them out?
Our regular officers do too as well. Positive ticketing, we prefer not to use the word ticketing, but I mean, that's the idea.
Any other further questions of Councillor Daly?
Thank you, Your Worship, or Deputy Mayor Blatt, sorry. I have been contacted by the president of the Uptown Association, and there is quite concern about the after hours of the bars and so forth, and the vandalism and kind of rebel rousing that's taking on after that. Is that on your scope at all for moving forward?
Yes, absolutely. We're very much aware of the bars in town and monitoring them as they people leave the bar at the end of their night and carry on, either pedestrian traffic or driving or whatever. We don't have unlimited resources in terms of policing them. However, we make our presence known, and certainly our shift always exceeds bar closure. So the members are around and they're on the road during those hours. Unfortunately, they can't be everywhere. I know typically, we've had some other things happen lately in terms of the plaques. I don't know if you want to discuss those. Those are certainly under investigation. We may be, through the community resource officer, engaging with the business community in town and discussing external cameras, just because we feel like it would assist us with any investigation after the fact concerning vandalism or theft.
Councillor Cummins, you have a question?
Thanks. So I'm still learning the mic. Just to follow up on that last point there, businesses and cameras, would it be feasible to approach us, because I'm a business owner uptown, and just make a list of where all the cameras are so you guys are aware of that? Because I know that as a business owner, we'd be happy to provide that information.
Absolutely. There's a registry that I believe Courtney Harding, our corporal, and Morley have been discussing. I know that I've been involved in limited conversations about it, but having a registry in town of who's got external cameras, and then we can just access that list and then go to them or phone them or email them requesting that they pull their footage from this date, this time to this date, this time, so we can review it. And even if they can also give us maybe a hand looking for something specific on there, that'd be great. But yes, we are in the process of putting together some kind of registry.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And thank you, Staff Sergeant Wright, for the report and your concise presentation. Much appreciated. I just had a couple of questions, if I may. One is, how long does it take to pull the report together, and who pulls the report together?
Like this report?
Yes.
Okay. So you'd like to know the process of how this is put together?
Yeah, is it basically information that comes from a platform within your system, or is it a lot of manual work and effort?
Okay, so I myself am not involved in the statistics that you see. So we do have a database, it's called PROS. PROS is just how we enter our information, and then they can pull statistics from it. So that's where they're getting the information from for the stats. Now, with regards to addressing the priorities and commenting on them, that's something that I do. And typically I commence it after the quarter's ended. What I do actually is, if you really want to know, is I've got an online program where anytime I have any interactions with town, I go on and I put in an entry. And I do that daily. I run a daily log. And I do that for all 5 communities. And then from there, quarterly, I'll go through my logs and I'll compile the information for the town of Olds. So I'll be able, because I'm doing it daily, to basically list off what I've done. And then I also go to Morley and I also get his information, and then I integrate that into the report. So I start off with the online report, which is called an APP report. And then a couple weeks later, I get this as a template, and then I have to basically fill the blanks in using this other report, okay? So it takes a couple weeks. But in terms of keeping current, I add to it daily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And just one more.
Is it a supplemental? I'd like to ask if anyone else has a question first, okay? If no one else does, then go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Oh, thanks. And just given your newness and your fresh eyes, how does Olds compare to other communities that you've been in, and similar size as far as its crime and its rate, its exposure, the activities that are happening? Any comment there? And what concerns you when you go to bed at night for your 2 hours of sleep? What keeps you awake?
See, Doug's not here. Okay, so Olds is my 9th posting. I've been a member of the RCMP for 20 and a half years. I just did 4 years in High Prairie. And if anybody's ever been up north of Edmonton, those communities are incredibly busy. Now, my community up there was mostly persons crimes, very violent persons crimes, and it kept us incredibly busy. I would come to work every morning with 2 or 3 things I had to deal with, like right now. Moving to Olds, certainly we don't really have any persons crimes, very little, if any, violence. What I see here is I see property crime. I don't think we're any different than any other community in central Alberta. I feel like a lot of our property crime is driven by drugs, specifically meth. I've been here 4 months, and I wouldn't say every day, but every other day we have either a vehicle or a trailer or something stolen in our detachment area, and it's related to meth. So that, in terms of what keeps me up at night, my concern is what these drug addicts are willing to do to get away from landowners and the police, what they're prepared to do to get away from us. And my concern is violence to get away. And it definitely, that concern's not going to go away very soon. We do a very, very good job of catching these guys. We really do. And if it's not us, it's our neighbors. Innisfil, Sundre, Didsbury. But unfortunately, we can't seem to keep them in custody. And then they get out and then they do it again. So, yes, that's the answer.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant Wright.
Are there any further questions for Staff Sergeant Wright at this point in time? Did our Community Resource Officer, Statchuk, want to say a few words before we ask for a motion to accept for information, or is anything further to add to this? Okay.
Well,
All right.
actually, if you wouldn't mind, just come out and take your mask off so they can see who you actually look like in case they see you somewhere else.
Thank you.
So more like, how much service? You have about 15?
I have 15 years, yes. And I've had about 6 years as a school resource officer. Previously to coming to Olds, I was in Airdrie for 5 years. And there's programs that I can speak, but I think we're past our 15 minutes.
Totally.
But I can definitely speak in some of the things we've done there and how it's being incorporated here now, mostly at the high school and the middle schools more so.
Next time, just include it in the report.
Pardon me?
Maybe you could just include that information in the report for next time.
It was, but I could give you a little more details. It was included there, but if you have, there's kind of presentation we do for grade 9s, 10s, 11s consistently.
Okay.
That seemed to be a benefit, and even the middle schools.
All right. Are there any questions of our Community Resource Officer, Statchuk, based on that information? All right, seeing none then, I will ask for a motion to accept for information. Thank you, both gentlemen, very much for your presentation on behalf of Mayor and Council. It was a great presentation, and we appreciate the time out of your day.
Thank you.
Counselor Wilson?
I'll make the motion to accept for information the November 1st RCMP report to town council.
So much. I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. Moving along in the agenda then. Our next up is the Olds Fire Department quarterly report. And Director Wagstaff, do you want to make the introduction, or does it go without saying?
Well, I'm remiss because I know just informally prior to the meeting, there was an introduction of our new Director of Operations. But if I may, at this point, just before we introduce the Director of Protective Services for the report, just to formally introduce to both council and public Scott Greco, our new Operations Director, who starts today. So welcome, Scott. You want to say just a couple of words before we continue?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Doug. Really happy to be here and really looking forward to the transition from City of Lethbridge into the town of Olds. So I'm happy to be here. A little bit nervous first day, but excited to be here and looking forward to working with all of you and the community. So thank you.
And with that, we'll turn it over to Director of Protective Services, Chief Andrew.
Thank you, Director Wagstaff. You're struggling with names today. That's okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. So I'm reporting on Q3 for the Olds Fire Department. Total number of incidents in this quarter were 97. This is a little higher than what we've seen in the previous. Currently, to date, we are running at approximately 345 calls on the year. And so 97 of those coming in this third quarter, which has was an increase substantially, especially over last year with our decline in numbers due to COVID, or so we believe. Just an indicator that people are back moving and resuming somewhat of a normal life for a period and then to kind of go backwards. But anyway, lots of activity going on. And so reporting some of these numbers quickly is our turnout time, which is the time from being summoned to the time that a effective response force is arriving on scene, is averaging at 9 minutes or 9.95 minutes. And that is a very respectable number for a paid-on-call fire department. So this isn't a statistic of myself or the deputy chief arriving in our pickup truck by ourselves. This is actually a fully staffed fire engine or apparatus that's capable of extinguishing fire or providing service. So that's a very good number. Our total response time, this is an average of how long it takes to resolve the situation. And so that comes through as 18.53 minutes. And again, taking in mind that this includes false alarm type activity where we may have been stood down before we actually get on scene, or we get there and stand everybody down immediately, to being on scene for a few hours for fires. So again, this number is pretty typical and there's no change in the trend there. The firefighters per incident, this comes through as the actual firefighters that make it to scene, so that are actually utilized on the incident, is 5.45. Sometimes maybe I account for that extra 0.45 of the person. I'm just a little bit bigger than I want to be. So anyway, our average is pretty healthy. And again, this takes into account everything from an active incident like a fire right down to a medical assist or an alarm call where maybe one person actually responded. So again, that number is fairly healthy and there's no change in that demographic for us. Going further, looking at the rural incidents, we have 31 incidents in this quarter. And if you look at the chart and the colors, again, I'm not going to cover it specifically, but orange is fire, light blue is a fire response with an outdoor component where it would be like a grass fire, so there's no associated dollar loss. And then the dark blue would be the medicals. So again, the statistics are up in the fall, which the biggest component on this is the medical, which I will speak to a little bit further when we get to the urban statistics. which if we look here in our urban incidents, we have 66. And you can see that the majority of these incidents are medical in nature. And so this speaks to the concern that we've had recently with the impacts of COVID on the healthcare system. We are seeing more incidents where there is no ambulance available immediately within the town of Olds, and we're relying upon the AHS's borderless service or model where they flex ambulances from other communities to ours. But we are seeing, there was a particular spike in September where we were spending a lot of time doing these medical first response calls, where we saw EMS unit responses of upwards of 40 minutes until they would arrive on scene. So that is a particular interest and concern to us, simply because we are providing that stopgap for EMS care, which we are happy to do, but it does have a burden on our system, and it does create a bit of an issue in the fact that despite our best intentions, we aren't operating at the same medical level as an ambulance. So we do look at that as a situation where we have somebody in a somewhat urgent or critical nature, and there's only so much that we can do, simply because we are limited with our resources. So these are all conversations that we'll have and we are paying attention to. Again, I don't want to raise the complete red alarm, but this is a common trend in Alberta municipalities, which you will see at the AUMA, where there's resolutions there. And the big piece is for us, I truly believe that we will monitor it and we can manage how long this kind of a trend continues, and or if it gets worse is definitely something that we will be paying very particular attention to. The last page here just speaks to the time of day where the most common incidents happen and the days of the week, so that's for information, just for curiosity's sake, that it's a pretty wide spread. And unless there's any questions, that's all I have to present at this time.
Councillor Cumming, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. What? Chief, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, all related.
If it's supplemental, I'd like to go around the room at least once for everybody to get an opportunity to ask a question.
Go ahead.
So go with your first question then, please.
Sure. Speaking of those medical call-outs, I think you've kind of leaned to this, that this is not typical response in the past, but it seems to be a trend moving more and more into a medical response trend moving forward. So you're saying these statistics that we're seeing here, where 46% or so of the call-outs are medical, is not normal, but expected and can expect to be continuing?
Yes, correct. So again, we'll see increases and decreases through different times of the year. Sometimes it's the time of year and or situations with the EMS. But again, in this last quarter, we saw a rise that is beyond what that normal increase would be. And more importantly, we saw an increase in the acuity of calls that we were responding to, and the fact that we were responding and on scene with those people longer than we would typically be. So a common medical call for us would be, to assist somebody with, we use an example such as a chest pain. So if somebody has a cardiac related illness, then that would be a higher level acuity call. We would co-respond with the EMS to provide assistance. Again, if the ambulance was out of town and coming, we can get there first, or we assist them because typically they're calls that involve more need for resources, so we can help the EMS crew that come with two. And again, like say, we see more of those calls where we're sitting on scene, still waiting for an ambulance to come from another community. Olds is a primary center, and so in the response model, AHS always tries to fill Olds with an ambulance. So there's typically ambulances, if they're not here, they're traveling to this location. But with the current situation that's happening in Calgary and Edmonton, they're just, they're struggling to find those ambulances. So we're seeing it, again, more often where it's, 20, 30 minutes could be the expected delay.
Thank you. I do have a supplementary question.
Is it supplemental? Because Councillor Ryan also has a question.
Yep.
Go ahead, Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. to Director Andrew, through you to Director Andrew. With regards to this response that we're doing, what is our exposure for risk? I'm concerned about having firefighters responding and sitting there and waiting while an ambulance staff is not there. And, you could have a serious situation where somebody is having a heart attack. We have firefighters who are obviously somewhat trained in first aid, but you're not an EMS specialist. And so I'm kind of concerned about having our firefighters sitting there, including yourself, who probably is the person on the scene. Can you speak to that, Director Andrew?
Certainly. So we participate in a program that's offered through Alberta Health Service, is the Medical First Response Program. So the fire department is covered to provide service and training and some resources in the medical scope. So everything that we do is based on medical protocols that have been developed and are overseen by an emergency physician in Calgary. And so our level of training is very robust. So our firefighters are trained to a higher level than first aid. So we do have a very high level of compliance that way, as far as, we take on new members and it takes some time to get up there, but we do have a good base. As far as the medical professionals, I am still and have been for 20 years an advanced care paramedic and registered in good standing with the college. Now, the only thing is that I cannot operate to that level of service because our protocols and our equipment are not at that level. And so those are things that we're looking at, and that I would look at presenting a case to council for consideration, is that with an expenditure in some capital equipment and or the approval to seek that operational standard, we could increase our response, because myself and one other member are both advanced care paramedics. We could essentially provide the same EMS level of care on scene. Again, we can't transport patients, but if critical life-saving interventions were required, it could be performed. And so we have to weigh the pros and cons, because there's obviously a dollar figure established to that, but most of that cost is up front and a one-time, simply because of what we would be required is such a cardiac monitor. So that's the device that can actually look at what's heart rhythm is going on, and it can electrically correct dysrhythmias and things like that. So that would be the major cost, but other than that, then once we establish that program, then it could continue. So again, we're working through the process with AHS to look at whether that's feasible for us, and then of course with council, whether that's a service level enhancement that you would like to see us go with.
Councillor Cummings.
Thank you. You kind of answered one of my questions there. That was great about getting the possibility of having more trained paramedics or EMS qualified staff. That's awesome. But you did mention something there about transport, that you can provide the first aid on scene, but you can't transport. Transport seems to be the big issue right now and going into the future. What prohibits you, other than the lack of having a vehicle to transport a casualty?
That's the tough question. The reality is we are, again, Alberta Health is going to be the agency that would dictate or allow that through licensure of an ambulance. And so in Alberta, you're not legally allowed to transport victims or casualties, patients, whatever you want to call them, unless you are in an inspected and approved ambulance. And so AHS is not in a position to approve municipalities for, even if the council decided that we wanted to buy an ambulance and have everything and essentially operate it, I don't believe AHS would support that. And so that would be the limiting factor. So this is a common fear and or a concern in our industry, because there have been situations where ambulances are delayed in different communities, and so the moral and ethical piece comes up as to what do you do if you know that you're 2 blocks away from or from the hospital. Shouldn't you just grab somebody and throw them in the back of the truck and drive and get there? And so that's a very difficult piece because it does put us in a particularly tough spot liability-wise. So where I see that there could be improvement is that if the option was there for us to enhance our service to offer the full scope of what I would be capable of delivering, is that what we say in the business of being an advanced care paramedic is we're essentially bringing the emergency department to you. Now, I'm certainly not comparing myself to a physician by any means at all, but in critical life-saving fashion and or need, we can offer very similar or many of the same treatments as you would get in the emergency department, such as in cardiac arrest. We initiate the same treatments, and so we do that literally in the home. So those are kind of the gray area of the legalities and liabilities of going further than what our scope is and or our abilities.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wilson, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, and thank you, Director Andrew, for the report. Sorry if I missed it, but how many ambulances are actually stationed in Olds at any time? And how does that dispatch work on medical emergencies with AHS and yourselves? Does the fire department automatically always respond along with an ambulance?
No, so AHS has one 24-hour ambulance stationed in Olds out of the fire hall location there. And they have another ambulance that I believe is a 12-hour car. It's from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. And ultimately, that second ambulance gets scooped up every day very quickly, performing interfacility transfers and or flex coverage around. So the one 24-hour emerge car is kind of the primary. As far as how it works is if you call 911 in Olds for an ambulance, the call is answered in Red Deer at the Red Deer Dispatch Center, and they'll ask you if you need police, fire, ambulance. If you say ambulance, then they say hold the line, and they transfer you to the EMS Dispatch Center in Calgary now, and that was as a result of the consolidation process that EMS has done. So then you hold the line momentarily, they answer the phone, they take your questions, find out what's going on, and then based on a bunch of, they actually call it interrogation, call interrogation. Sounds very dramatic, but anyway, based on the answers that you give as the caller, it creates a medical determinant of what the nature of the incident is and the priority level. And we, as the fire department, through our medical first response program, we have a list of all these medical determinants. And this is the one thing that we as the municipality have the power to decide as to what level of service you would like to see the fire department respond. So we've gone through and rigorously evaluated each one of these medical determinants, and we have inputted into the system that we would automatically be dispatched based on the severity and the nature of the call. So an example would be is if somebody is in cardiac arrest, then we automatically are dispatched. And so we've gone through that, and specific other ones like things where burns or explosions or traumatic incidents such as car accidents, all of those are automatic dispatch points for us. The other one that we have triggered is if an ambulance is greater than 15 minutes from the community, that is an automatic trigger for us for basically any level of call. So that means that if somebody was waiting more than 15 minutes, even if you stubbed your toe, then the fire department would be called for assistance. And so we've worked really hard to find a balance that we're not over-activating our people for, not a high priority need. And we seem to be working in a pretty good fashion. I'm quite happy with the level of service that we're providing that way.
Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, I'm just curious that you're saying that medical trends are increasing. What baseline do you work from, or what's the average over the past few years?
Yeah, so we've been just looking in the last year where some of these trends are, and I could actually pull some data and present it to council at a future time or subsequently, because we look at these numbers, and again, there is always those waves where it's up and down, and I always trying to find the median. But again, like say this quarter in particular was substantially higher. Now again, currently operating now in the fourth quarter, we've seen a decline in those numbers again. So But we're still very concerned because when we are activated, we seem to be being activated for the longer periods where it's not so much the number of calls, but it's the period of time that we're spending on the call is the bigger concern.
I believe we have Councillor Daly and then, and what about you, Councillor Cummins? Did you have another question as well? Okay, Councillor Daly and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Thank you for your report. Very informative, and it gives us a little bit of an insight of how busy our protective services are. And my question is, looking forward, have you put any thought into what your needs are going to be like 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the road? Being a newbie here on council, of course, I'd kind of like to have a little bit of an idea of what that would look like and what would make it a better system than what we have now moving forward.
Yes, very much so. I refer to our kind of guiding light principle document as being our fire master plan that was commissioned and completed in 2019. And so we are very well equipped in many facets. And so the one area that was identified in that master plan then was, as we're building our service and building it for the growth and establishment for sustainable operation in the future, was the hiring of a second full-time deputy fire chief. And where the biggest benefit that position brings to the table is with the move to having a second deputy chief, we could move to a full-time response model where we would have one of the three positions always on call and always response capable. And when that happens, we would look at reducing the number of call-outs of the paid-on-call members by taking the low acuity, small hazard type responses out of the total mix. Right now, when we get a call, we page out everybody and they all respond. Well, I shouldn't say they don't all respond, but they are essentially summoned, and it's all hours of the day and night for every type of incident. Whereas when we can dedicate resources to say that, yes, this deputy chief or this fire chief is on call and will respond if it's a low-level type alarm call where it would be one of our typical false alarm type incidents of a residential smoke alarm or even a medical first response, we could actually reduce the need of the members to be called. And that in itself is going to be the sustainability of our paid on call model long into the future. Is if we can only call these guys, men and ladies, out when they're actually needed, as opposed to for the, I don't want to call it fluff because everything is important, but the low acuity things that there is not a need for that, that's going to keep us well fit into the future. Because if we continue at the pace that we're at, and again, over a projected 420, 430 calls this year, that's a lot of times to be summoned from your work or for your personal life, and that starts to have impacts on your family life and your employment. And so that is by far the biggest need that we have to keep our system operating.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you had...
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Just a couple quick related questions. The turnout time, what is the target for your group? Like you mentioned, it's 9.95 or 9.95 minutes. What's your target? And how do you get there short of, and I think you started to address some of the things, but how do you get there short of having people living and residing on site?
Right. So that's a really good question, and we've actually talked about this as of late, is what is our target? And so right now we don't have a target, simply because if we make a target, then you as council are, obviously we set a benchmark, and then if we don't meet it, then the answer is why, and it's going to come down to resources. Being people is our number one limiting factor. So if I told you that we will promise you 10 minutes is that target number, and then we don't meet it, and you say, well, why? And say, because I can't get members there fast enough, then the only solution is to have paid members there. So typically in a paid on-call environment, we don't set that target. We certainly have goals that we'd love to achieve, but I can tell you that having a turnout time of less than 10 minutes for a paid on-call department is a very high standard and a very acceptable. So What I would like to do is, in future reporting to you as a new council, is that we would show you quarter by quarter and annually where we're at from what we've been at previously, and then you can say, well, why are you so much higher? Well, you know what, it's summertime, most of our members were on vacation, so we struggled. Or during COVID, our numbers have been spectacular because we had so many people working from home and were able to respond, which was a huge benefit for us. On the flip side, our call volume was down because people weren't moving and doing, so it's kind of the perfect storm.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that answer, and yeah, I agree, a trending would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of Director Andrew? Seeing none, then I would call for a motion to accept for information. Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Well, I'll make the motion to accept the fire department report from Director Andrew as of November 1 to Town Council.
Thank you so much. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. Moving along then to our Olds Municipal Enforcement report, quarterly report. And Director Wagstaff, are you introducing or is Chief Andrew?
Yes, I will. I'll ask Sergeant Christensen to please come forward and be the first one who I've remembered their last name correctly.
I don't know if that's good or bad. So today I'm here to present our third quarter reports, and for the people that don't know me, for the new councillors, I'm Sergeant Eric Christensen, been with the town of Olds for the last 2 years. So welcome to the new councillors and the re-elect as well. So I'll just kind of briefly go through some of these stats for you. Oh, thank you. I got some weird thing here. So the highlighted section is our third quarter. In most cases, we're above what we were last year, and in some cases we're down. So we didn't have any snow or ice for the third quarter, which is good, I guess. One thing I want to point out a little bit is on our violations. They're down a little bit, and the reason for that is we've had some staffing changes, and currently I'm the only one that's appointed to be able to do traffic enforcement throughout the town. So we are working on getting our other officer up to that level, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. One of the big increases is our public behaviors, and the reason that's up is we focused this last, since May till now, working on graffiti and graffiti removal. So that's why that number's gone so high. We'll just go through the next one that's increased quite a bit is the officer observed. So what that is when my officers are out actually patrolling around, they're actually finding things and actually dealing with them instead of waiting for a complaint to come in on them. So officer observed, that's what that is. Page 31, the crime class. So we break everything down into crime classes, although we use crime words differently in the municipal world than we do for the RCMP. So our community standards is our biggest one. That's the one we deal with the most. That's our unsightlies and public behavior. And then the next one, of course, is animal control, and then down to traffic. And then the other ones are just small, minute ones that we deal with. The next page is our method of reporting. So we're on cue for about 50% of our time is dealt with officer observed stuff opposed to complaints. So our violation disposition, so we break that down into provincial and municipal. So for the new councillors, we do have a lot of municipal charges. However, most of those are mimicked by a provincial charge. Because it's so expensive for us to prosecute a municipal ticket, we will normally try to go provincial, and works better out for us and it's cheaper for the municipality in the long run. Our next page is our contact report. So for us, contact reports are anybody that will call us. If there's no action required on that, then we would call that a contact report. If it's something that will change after we call them, if it question about a bylaw or, those type of things, and then it turns into an actual complaint, then we would switch it over to an actual field report. And again, we already talked about graffiti removal. We hired a bylaw enforcement student in May 3rd of this year. She's been busy doing that. Just in the third quarter, we had 29 new files for graffiti, which we've had most of those cleaned up. Unsightly properties, we've been busy at that. We've had 100 unsightly premises this third quarter, and that's just all of your grass, weeds, yards that are quite messy, that type of stuff. Our traffic and traffic initiatives, so July was impaired driving month, and construction zone safety and off-highway vehicle safety month. As Staff Sergeant Wright had explained, that we helped out with that. We don't actively look for impaired drivers. If we happen to come across them, we would call the RCMP to deal with them. If they're not available to deal with them, as a CPO1, I have the authority to give a 24-hour suspension to get them off the road. We didn't issue any of those. However, we have been involved with the JFOs, Joint Forces Operations, with the RCMP on those. In the construction zone, we had 66 violations that were issued in the construction zones on 2A and Highway 27, just to make sure that the construction workers were safe. We didn't issue any off-highway vehicle violations. In August was our new driver safety enforcement month. We didn't have any new drivers that we had to deal with. And September is our back-to-school safety month, and we worked closely with the RCMP, ensuring that the parents, residents, and students all understood school zones, crosswalks, and bus safety. So we follow the Alberta Traffic Safety Calendar, which is set out by the Alberta Safe Roads, and we just follow that for our safety. Our traffic and traffic initiatives, again, we were busy patrolling our school zones and playground zones. We had 15 warnings and 3 violations in the third quarter. We have received quite a few complaints from the bus drivers about people not stopping for the red lights, so we've been busy out in the mornings and afternoons trying to make sure that people are following that. We did have, in the third quarter, 3 warnings and 1 violation that was actually issued. Just a little bit of update on our municipal enforcement. So we were busy over the summer working on our bike patrols. We did a lot of education in regards to our e-scooters that are starting to pop up all over the place, and so we do allow them on our trails, but not on our roadways or sidewalks at this time. And I am working on trying to get approval for that through the Alberta government, but that's taking some time, of course. We started our e-ticketing. We did all the testing, and we went live October 1st, which has been a great savings tool for our officers out on the field. CPO Gutsis is our newest CPO. She actually started out as our summer student, and we've increased her up to a level 2 CPO. So for the people that don't know, understand the peace officer world, we have 2 levels of CPO. There's a CPO 1 and CPO 2. The difference is the CPO 1s can enforce moving traffic, CPO 2s cannot enforce moving traffic. So whenever you see the second vehicle out there, which is the Ford Explorer, if you see something happen and they don't stop them, that's the reason why, because they don't have the authority to stop anybody that's moving. So if it's a parked car that doesn't have insurance or registration on it, they can deal with it, but if it's moving, they can't deal with it. She's about halfway through her training to become a level 1, so we're getting there with her. Positive tickets, Staff Sergeant Wright had mentioned a little bit about that, and we've been instrumental in getting that going as well. Just in the third quarter, we've issued 289 positive tickets to date, so we've been busy on that. With that concludes a brief overview of all of my stuff. If you have any questions, I'm here to happy to answer them for you.
Thank you, Sergeant Christensen. Are there any questions? All right, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. So I have a couple of unrelated questions. I'll just ask the first one, I guess, there. So when your statistics there, you had mentioned, I'm trying to find it there, animal control being our second largest call out. We don't have a dedicated animal control service, and I'm ignorant to the way towns do that. Is that typical for towns at this size or level to not yet have an animal control dedicated process?
So most municipalities our size currently use their peace officers as their animal control specialists, and myself, I've got numerous training courses on animal control. It's an expensive person to have one person that's just dedicated to animal control. Now, there is companies that will come in and do it, but we've done some research in the past, and it has become very expensive to have just a dedicated person for that.
Dollars. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there anyone else with a question? Councillor Wilson, and then back to Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, and thank you, Sergeant Christensen, for your report. I just have a question that'll take you right into the weeds on that page that Marcy has displayed, page 30 there. So if I look at August as an example in the Q3, what am I adding up to get? You have community standards of 50 for the month of August. How do I get to that 50 then, looking at that column?
So if you just look at the community standards, if you just added everything above where it says bylaw other.
Right?
Oh, something's not adding up there.
Okay, nope. I just wanted to confirm whether there was subcodes, subcategories, or whatever.
Yeah, it's assuming that my formula did not work, so I'm going to have to review that and send it back
fair
out.
enough.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. And I think there's actually a couple of, I'm anal about that, so.
No, I appreciate that, yeah.
I think there's a couple of columns that have probably formula add errors, but again, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something as far as the grouping and the categorization, so thank you.
I'll check that out and send out a supplemental to council.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cummins, you had a further question?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the school bus safety initiative that was conducted there, so I understand that it's a contentious issue with school bus crossings. I'm not sure how new the rule was, this red light, amber light issue. What brings it to my attention is the other day I was driving out of town on 50th Avenue there, and a school bus was coming up to the road or to a house to drop off its kids with its amber flashing lights. It stopped, it let the kids off. As I was approaching to pass, because I'm allowed to pass with amber flashing lights, as I got to within a meter of the bus, it turned its lights to red, popped its sign out. The kids were already in the driveway. Of course, the mother lost her bubble on me and started screaming and hollering and all that stuff. You mentioned that you were targeting the drivers, I'm not sure what word to use, the people driving their cars, as opposed, or motorists, I guess. Is there some sort of idea to educate the parents and the bus drivers themselves? Because obviously that bus driver did something completely wrong, right? And I took the brunt of that as a driver, because the parent wasn't aware that the bus driver was doing the thing wrong, right? So the basic question is great that we're tackling the motorists because the bus drivers are complaining, but are we at the same time educating the parents and the bus drivers to remind the bus drivers of their obligations to follow the rules, and the parents to understand the rules so they can see the violations and report them?
So we do issue a lot of did you knows through social media. As for your situation there, I do have a contact with the Chinook School Division that I can definitely, have a discussion with her to make sure that her drivers are following the proper protocols, because those orange lights should be coming on, and then red lights, then the door opens up and lets the children out. So I will bring that up with her as well, just as a reminder.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions of Sergeant Christensen? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Just a quick one. Just wondering, the coordination between yourselves and the RCMP, and I realize there's different roles and areas of responsibility and jurisdictions, but how does that work? Or if at all, do you guys meet weekly, daily, and kind of say, hey, we need an area to target here, or here's where we're going, here's where you go? And again, I realize you're two separate entities, but.
So through the chair to yourself, so Staff Sergeant and I we meet quite regularly, at least once a week for sure. And we're always in constant contact with each other if we have something coming up, or we need help with something, or they need help with something, or if we have something that we need them to deal with that we can't deal with based on our appointments and our authorities, and vice versa. They, if they have something simple, unfortunately, they've had people that have called in to their departments about, loose dogs or that kind of stuff. They'll try to reach out to us and say, hey, can you deal with this? We're busy doing this, or that type of stuff. So we meet at least once a week.
Mayor Dahl, you have a question?
No, I'm ready for a motion.
Okay, perfect. I'll call for the motion then to,
Okay.
Councillor Daly, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Sergeant Christensen, thank you for your report. Really appreciate it, all that you're doing out in the community and your team. I know you can't be everywhere all the time. There's limited resources. In my talking with the public and stuff, one of the big things that came up was the speed control around town. And there's some hot spots in town which seem to come up on a regular basis in conversation. One of them being Winters Drive, one of them being the road that goes out south of town to the back way to Didsbury. I can't remember what the name of the street is there. But has your department ever considered alternative ways of monitoring speed? And I don't want to say it out loud, but I guess I'm going to have to, like speed cameras, or I know your digital signs work quite well, because when they're up, you can see brake lights come on when the red flashing light comes on for people. But I'm just wondering if you've ever considered those types of options.
So I'm assuming you're talking about 57th Ave? Yeah. So, myself and the RCMP have spent a lot of time out there. And we've researched the data with our speed signs out there. So our average speed that we found out there was between 60 and 65 leaving town. And not very many of those. And I know for myself that I've been out there and I have, I've probably stopped 5 or 6 vehicles in the third quarter. Just, we're pushing it a little bit far. We haven't looked at anything else in regards to permanent speed signs or anything like that. So when we get these complaints in from residents, we will always, investigate them, and if a speed sign would help, we definitely move it out there. We move them around as much as possible. We have had them up in the hospital area because of the construction zone there, but we are actually going to move them out. We've had them out on 57th Ave. We've had them out. We've had them on 46th Street. We've had them on 2A. We've had them out on 70th. So we move them around. So whenever residents have these concerns, we are happy to investigate them and happy to put those speed signs out. But we have not looked at any type of photo radar or speed signs. And Director Wagstaff might have a little bit more information on some of that stuff.
So it's been a number of years since we looked at it, because it was just prior to Sergeant Christensen joining the town of Olds that we had taken a look at it, and it was with the prior director of finance. So it's when before Sheena became director. So it is a couple of years ago. But when we did look into that, one of the things that we found was we were still held liable. So those companies would come in, they'll set that up, they'll send the ticket in, and they send us the bill for it, or they invoice us for it. So we pay as the town. Whether or not that gets collected, there is a gap there, that there was a risk financially that we felt was too large of a risk for us to take on, was the fact that we paid, whether or not the offender paid successfully or not. So we chose not to go in that direction and just continue to look at that time, we reinvested in the trailers, with the speed trailers on there to try to work and have that sort of a education compliance.
And I can just add to that, sorry, Director Andrew. In my previous municipality, I was instrumental in actually reintroducing photo radar and automatic traffic enforcement into the community, where we actually ran the program instead of having a company run the program. It's something that I can definitely bring back to the council here if it was something they wanted to, are interested in hearing.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrew. I mean, sorry, Director Andrew.
The one piece that ties to this conversation I just want to bring to light is at the bottom of the page, you see the fines revenue for 2021 to date is 21,000 roughly, of the budget being 15. And so one thing I want to make clear is that it wasn't because we had a glut of enforcement through COVID, but what has changed is that previously all of the fine revenue that was coming into the town was being credited to the RCMP, just because of the way it was paid and it's reported from the province. And so Sergeant Christensen has worked now to separate that and actually apply it specifically. And so the one piece that's important to recognize is that the RCMP are an absolute asset for criminal investigation and the legwork of all of that kind of activity. And the one thing that they'll never turn the other cheek per se if they see, moving traffic violations in town, but that is not their primary focus. Whereas with our municipal enforcement officers, Sergeant Christensen can direct that activity, and whether it's himself or his other officer can go and focus on these speed-related issues and actually allocate the resource and time to focus where you as council want it to be focused. And so there is the benefit of that, and you can see clearly that the revenue is coming more from the municipal enforcement side of things than it would be provincially through the RCMP. So that is a benefit and something to ponder going forward, is where we identify these problems, how we address our resources and what the priorities will be to mitigate that. So Sergeant Christensen's got a bunch of ideas, whether it's photo radar, whether it's the speed signs as he has in place, or if it's actual physical speed traps and or patrol.
Thank you for that, Director Andrew. Seeing no further questions, I believe, Mayor Dahl, you're ready to make a motion to accept this for information. Your mic. Well, I think we've just been leaving it on.
Thank you very much. Very good information. Deputy Mayor Blatz, through you, I move to accept for information the third quarter statistics report 2021.
Thank you for that. I will now call the vote. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you so much, folks. Moving along now to the Operations and Capital Monthly Verbal Report. And as we all received the report prior to this meeting via email, I will have Director Wagstaff start.
So there isn't a change from the, there's a minor change in the email that was sent this morning from the one that you received as council last week. The only difference is the detour road, not only is it no longer being used, it has been removed physically and reclaimed back into a ditch. That's the difference in the report this morning as compared to last Wednesday when you received it as council. So we are pleased to just give the update publicly that the roundabout is open, it is functioning, and the only remaining pieces out there are with regards to the landscaping around there. The side exits will not be opened this winter. They're not going to be opened until the spring. So access into 68th Ave will not be there until the spring, so that we can ensure that we get any heaving and that kind of thing right there when it goes from gravel to pavement, that's looked after before that's opened up completely. As with regards to Highway 27 and 70th Avenue, we are now waiting for the structures for the lights themselves to be put up, and then in progress to have the lighting system added. That is anticipated to be done over the next 2 weeks.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure you've let Director Greco know that next time he's going to be presenting a verbal report.
On everything.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Director Wagstaff? Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just one quick question. In your email this morning, it says that I just want a term clarification, roundabout will remain a construction zone until street lights are installed. We're not talking traffic lights, just the actual illumination lights?
That's correct. There will be illumination at the roundabout, so that the construction zone will remain until that is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further? Oh, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, Director Wagstaff, for that update. I just have a quick question. I didn't take a look at the email, but, so is the operations center, it's finished, finalized, all landscaping and everything is done, and work orders are closed, and purchase orders, everything's done?
There is still the work to be completed with the salt sand shed, so we are proceeding with that. And then the rest of the issue to finish off out there is one that we have in a legal process between our legal counsel and the general contractor.
Thank you. Are there any further questions of Director Wagstaff? Seeing none, could I have a motion to accept this report for information? Councillor Ryan, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I move that we accept the Acting Director of Operations, Doug Wagstaff's report on the operations update and capital projects. As verbally presented.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you so much. We will now move along to the Economic Development Quarterly Report, and I will leave this up to Acting CEO Wagstaff to make the introductions, please.
We'd like to ask Sandra Blythe to come forward and present the economic development presentation, please.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. Well, we're going to touch on a very dry topic at the end of the day, or end of this morning anyway, but hopefully I'll try and make it interesting. I guess I'm new as well, so I just started at the end of July, so this presentation actually comes at a very good time for all of us to talk about what that strategy, what the economic development strategy can look like. And I won't get too much in the weeds this morning. I know we don't want to spend the morning looking at this. So basically a little bit about myself. I've been in economic development for over 23 years. 17 of those years I had my own consulting companies. Essentially what I did was I developed economic and industry growth strategies for governments. My clients largely was the province of Saskatchewan as well as municipalities. So getting into this, I'm going to sort of touch on the treetops of the economic strategy that I'm putting forward to you. And try and take out, I've found over the years, communities have really appreciated a few current slides that I'm going to show to you that sort of really makes it a very ambiguous topic, very simplistic. So I find they've appreciated those, so I have included those as well. So ultimately, when I came here in July, the previous council had a strategy, and the priority was to embark on an economic development plan that includes a business retention and attraction strategy. So you're also now going to be moving into developing your own strategy, and I'm sure economic development is going to play a role in setting those priorities. So with that, just to give a bit of a backgrounder on the evolution of economic development. So ultimately, it's really not that old. It's about 60, 70 years old, and it originated right after World War II. And obviously, during that time, we were hitting industrialization. We were looking at a huge recession and poverty happening in Canada and around the world. And so the federal government started out with economic development, looking at investment attraction. That's where they focused their priority, and that was ultimately chasing those smokestacks. They offered land, subsidies, and incentives to try and get companies to come to Canada. Now with that, what they quickly found out was it was very expensive. You can get that smokestack in your community, but if there's no market links or things that tie them to that community as far as your assets, they don't always stay, and it can be very expensive to get them and then keep them. So over time, then we moved into about the 60s, where government said, we've got to do better at this. So they started to focus in the area of business development and entrepreneurs. developing organizations that we still have today. So Community Futures would be a business development organization, an entrepreneur-focused organization, as well as regional economic development authorities. So CAPE would be our regional economic development authority. Now, many provinces have gone away from these. For instance, province of Saskatchewan left regional economic development authorities about 15 years ago when Wall government came in. In Alberta, we still have them, though their funding model has now changed. So then from there, we went into P3 partnerships. So as we all know, those can work and sometimes they don't work. But governments obviously put a lot of investment into that, especially from the federal level. And so there's pros and cons to that as well. And here we are today. So in and about the late 80s, now we've had about 60 years experience understanding what we've applied and what's worked and what hasn't worked, and ultimately where we've landed today. And this is implemented across countries all over the world, and I will explain in a few more slides how we get here. But ultimately, economic strategies need to now focus on creating competitive growth economies and ecosystems of economies. They should be multifaceted, holistic in their approach, including a multitude of stakeholders and agencies that are engaged in collaborative bottom-up planning and focused on creating competitive business environments to grow your local industry clusters and spur investment from within. That's a whole mouthful of stuff, but ultimately what that's saying is growing an economy isn't always about attracting from beyond. It's about working with your local industries, those key assets that are in your community, and helping to specialize in the things that we provide them to ensure they have a competitive environment. So if we jump back about 30 years ago, our companies and our communities competed with the guy up the road or the guy next door. Our companies today are competing with countries all over the world. They're competing globally. That means we have to up our game at the local level to create that environment that gives them that competitive advantage. So we'll get into a little bit about that in a bit. So economic development ultimately has three approaches, but before I get into that, economic development and community development are often used interchangeably. There's always confusion about what the difference is, and it's very simple. Community development are those approaches and things that actually make a community a better place to live. So that would be like all the things you just watched presentations on. So RCMP, poverty, homelessness, things that make your community, give it a higher quality of life. That's community development. Economic development, on the other hand, is all about creating wealth. With that, there are three approaches to attacking economic development. And the first one is business retention and expansion. That's all about enhancing your local business communities. They are key, and they actually create 75 to 80% of local jobs. They're already invested in your community, and they have the greatest stake in wanting to see the community grow. So that's where we need to prioritize first. Business attraction, that's all about attracting new businesses. And finally, business creation is encouraging entrepreneurship and the growth of new businesses. So those are the three approaches. So whenever you see a presentation from me, or as I'll be reporting, it will be in those three areas. So this slide here comes from the Harvard School of Business. So the strategy I'm going to talk to you about is all based specifically around this. So there's two approaches. Historically, we've taken a very tactical approach to economic development, meaning on one side we can focus on attracting new investments, but a more strategic approach would be supporting greater local investment with existing companies. We can compete for every plant on our own, or we can reinforce areas of specialization and emerging cluster strength. By that means instead of going after the new company, work with the companies that exist here and find out ways that we can attract businesses that will actually affect their bottom line, or things that will help us create a more specialized environment that gives them that competitive edge. Offering generalized tax breaks. Well, that's one avenue. We can look into the United States and see the tax breaks, incentivizations, and subsidies that they provide many industries down there. It's in the billions. I can then show you many studies that show how that money was wasted and how it didn't actually spur new development. So on the other side, if we're more strategic in that way, we can look at providing support, and you'll see state because this is an American slide. But we can provide support to training, infrastructure, and institutions. What does that mean? So an example would be when a new company is coming in, a company that is bringing in, say, 250, 300 jobs, oftentimes that's a company that does in-house training. They spend all of their money on HR and they do it all in-house because it's cheaper to do it that way. As communities and governments, if we can subsidize those companies by saying, we'll subsidize students, as an example, to go to our college and take training that you actually need. Taking students out of school, put them into university or into the college, and then subsidize those to go or to land in jobs eventually. In that way, if that company does leave one day, we've created a skill set in our community. If we understand our other industries and there's value there, then it makes sense. So it's about leaving money in the community instead of just handing it over. And so when we go through all of these, we can look on the tactical side, which is very insular, or we can look on the other side of the page and create a system that's more strategic in where we're going. So again, every city and subregion for itself. If we look at creating an economic strategy just for the community of Olds, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot. The reality is the industries that bring money into our community are all around us. They're out in the region. They're in other communities. And by working together with other communities in our county that surrounds us, we're going to be better equipped to meet those global companies if and when they come. Again, government drives investment attraction on the tactical side, or government is working in collaboration with private sector to build industries. So this person was Michael Porter. He is known as one of the world's most leading theorists in economic strategy. And so his work and whatnot is often implemented in very successful economic jurisdictions around the world. So the economic development strategy, as I say, I won't get too much in the weeds here, but ultimately the strategy that we create is all about creating an overarching plan to drive those three approaches I just talked about. So first and foremost, the first step is reviewing our economic environment. So you'll see 8 bubbles here. Now, different strategists lay this out in different ways and whatnot, but ultimately at the end of the day, an economy represents these ones. I picked this one because I think it's the most simplistic in understanding. So if we look at our environment and we start to understand through our industries and our businesses what's working and what's not working in that environment, and actually be able to measure. So each of these 8 bubbles has a whole list of data sets that we can begin to measure where we're having impacts. Some of the challenges that we've faced historically is the inability to measure our economy. If you can't measure it, you don't know where you're having an impact. So there are various ways we can measure these areas and see over time where we're going to be. So that's one of the things I've been having discussions with the college and looking at potentially other analysts that can put these numbers in so we can benchmark where we are today and then see where we're going over time. So what we need to know is, do we have the capacity to meet our industries? Are we creating specialized capabilities in our environment that actually serves our industry? So again, I'll use the college as a great example. Your college is very successful, and unlike many other colleges across Canada, because they identified agriculture, agri-tech, agribusiness as a specialty area because it's a driving industry in this area. So they're creating a specialized workforce, specialized programming to meet those needs. And that's why it's grown, because it's an asset and it makes sense. And do we have an environment that can be more responsive to change, to the changing of our industries? So when we look at the oil and gas industry right now, if we look at that more holistically and go, you know, if 40 years ago we actually decided to start developing our oil and gas industry and processing more here than in the West, we would have been less troubled by the move to the pipeline and so forth, right? So it's about creating market links to your economy so it makes it less hard for them to leave. Whoops, let's go back. Number 2, so once we work on the environment and we understand what our environment looks like and we understand where there's gaps, what's working, what's not working, the next thing that we have to do is look at our economic engines. So these are our major industry players, and we have to understand how they work, what their issues are, how does the environment serve them, what doesn't serve them. In 25 years, I've walked into many communities where I've met the economic development officer who doesn't even know who the owner of the leading company in their community is. They don't know who those business owners are. That's tragic. How can you help build a community if you don't know who those players are? And you have to understand them. So when I go into a community, one of the first things I do after I do all the research and whatnot, is I start lining up meetings with those industry players, and I always have the same survey. Some of the quick questions I ask them is I want to understand your markets. First of all, what are you importing? How much are you exporting? What countries are you exporting to? What challenges do you have? If there were things in the local supply chain that you could access that would make a difference to your company, what would that be? And can you tell me why you don't get it here? And if I did something, could I get them here? Now we're getting into discussions about what investment attraction really should be. So it's those kinds of discussions, because as soon as I have that, I know how linked they are to the economy, and I know how fragile that industry is here. But it also tells me by the time I get to the end of it, where there's cross-linkages between those companies. So historically, when I've brought together industries, competing industries to a table, often it's hard to get them there. And I always use oil and gas as a great example. Many years ago, when we started a strategy similar to this, they said to me, you're never going to get those oil and gas companies in the same room. These are multi-million-dollar companies, and they're not going to sit in the room across from the guy that they're competing with and talk about the challenges that they face. And it wasn't easy getting them in the room. But once we did, quickly, things started to percolate, where they saw they had the same issues, and that by potentially working together, they could solve some of those. They could share in costs as far as marketing or importing supplies. If they shared in those costs, it'd be easier, more cost-effective to do so. It just requires getting in the room to have the discussion. So when you look here at a cluster, at the very top are your leading industries. So this is what we would call your export producers. The middle layer are your regional suppliers. These are the guys that service and provide product to those industries. And at the very bottom is your environment. That's your 8 areas of inputs to your economy. So what we want to do is create more linkages between that middle area and the top, as well as ensuring that our environment is providing a healthy, competitive environment. Okay, so those would be the 2 things that I'm going to be focusing on going forward. The third thing is, at the end of this, I've never developed a strategy that didn't have an implementation mechanism. Because you can come up with many ideas and reports, but if you can't implement, you've done nothing. So with this will eventually come an economic planning and action system, which down the road we can talk a little bit more about. And this is about long-term planning and success. Any economic development strategy that comes forward, there is no way. It typically takes 1 year to 2 years to get all the data, information, strategy developed. Implementation typically doesn't happen until the 3rd year. In all honesty, if I'm going to be really frank, one of the challenges we have in economic development, one of the greatest challenges that we have, is that often economic development is solely funded by government. And every 4 years, a new council, a new government comes in. And government says, I don't want to do what they did. We're going to do something new. And it starts all over again. And then what happens is, eventually, 1 year down the road, what does that economic development officer do? I don't know what that guy does. Previous council put hundreds of thousands of dollars into that office, and what did we get for it? So that's honesty. And it happens at all levels of government. So my plea to you is, let us get to the economic planning and action system and work together as a community, not just as government, as a community and a region, to have effective progressive change. Oh, and that's eventually down the road, we'll get into the system, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that and how we can measure that. So, economic development opportunities. So here's obviously not a conclusive list, but here I outline some of your exporters and suppliers in Olds, in area. There's a host of these people in here that obviously I'm going to have to start going out and talking to. Spearhead Manufacturing, we're getting meetings set up with them, and some of these other ones that are going to come on side here very soon again. So Economic Foundation, who are those people that fit within some of these bubbles? Obviously, Olds College is all about workforce, research, and development bubbles. The catchment area of 1.2 million people, this is a huge asset for us to be able to access talent. ONET, the highway corridor, all these infrastructure pieces are critical assets and pieces that I see coming in as an outsider. There's these huge opportunities here. We just got to connect the dots in some areas. And once we do that, it can be huge. Annexed 430 acres of land. I can't wait to sell that. I've got an investor right now. We're looking at a $350 million plant that could come here. So we can utilize about, I forget how many acres they need. I think it's 384 acres they need for that plant. So with that, then we're ultimately probably going to be in discussions with the county about infrastructure items and things like that. But anyways, so what we need to understand first is our industries and those economic engines and our environment. Okay, so this slide, again, every time I pull it up, nods all across the room. So some of the economic development challenges that not just Olds, all communities and economic jurisdictions face at times. A strategic direction. So one of the greatest issues we have also in economic development, and I've been around, like I say, for a long time, or maybe too long, is that oftentimes we use old systems for economic planning. And by that I mean, I have sat in many rooms where we get 10, 15, maybe 40 people in a room. And the facilitator brings together some key areas. And everybody starts talking and throwing out ideas. And we get the sheets up on the wall, and here come all the ideas. And then we wind up going down some paths, like, okay, and I got nothing against tourism, but it's a good example. We can put up on the wall, and I've seen this happen. We've got to build a tourism information center, we've got to get that out on the road, and we've got to do all these things, and it just so happens there's people in the room that was the tourism director, We've got people that want to see a tourism booth happening on the highway. And then we have discussions with industry, and industry says, I can't get my product out of here on a train. So if I can't get, say, methanol out of here on a train, I can tell you in 5 years, I'm probably going to be gone. This plant will be gone because we're not globally competitive. And the reality is, with global companies, we're a number on a spreadsheet. Shareholders don't care. They just want to make sure they're seeing an ROI. So it's our job to make sure that those companies are realizing a return on investment. To do that, we need a strategic direction. And we can all sit here right now, fill these walls with lists of ideas, but the reality is, there's real priorities. And with limited resources, limited money, especially in rural communities, we have to figure out what those real priorities are. And those are the things that we have to fix first, because they're going to have the greatest impacts. So that's where an economic strategy comes in and is critical. So with that, a strategy needs to be joint. So one of the other issues that we have in economic development that holds things back, silos, turf wars, competition, distrust, and limited communication. Everybody suffers this, and the reason is that there isn't a joint strategy. Nobody knows what the other's doing. People are claiming they're doing things that oftentimes they aren't. And they're in competition for money, typically from you guys, from the province and the feds, and they're fighting. And I can tell you, because I've worked in provincial government at various levels, when those applications come in for funding, and they look back and they go, there's no partnerships in this application, or they talk to the community and the community's fighting, the province says, no, we're not funding that. And so that's why the province is pushing IDPs and things like that in our communities. So that is one of the biggest things that we have to get over as well. So not just developing a strategy, but how do we work together and communicate so we're all working together and we're maximizing our resources and we're all on the same page. That's what industry wants to see. And lastly, effective governance systems. So we do it to ourselves. So when we look at things, we have a maze of boundaries. So one of the first things I did the first month I was here is figuring out the governance structure. So we have numerous economic development agencies, numerous business development agencies, a number of which are working at cross purposes. There's overlap in some of these services as well. And some are funded more than others, and so they get more of a say in things, and we have to think more like business. So I've spent a career talking about how do we think more like an entrepreneur, more like a business, and look at ways that we can work together, because the agriculture industry doesn't care about boundaries. The manufacturing industry doesn't care about our boxes that we put ourselves in. And provinces, provincial governments, for years have discussed this. How do we set up jurisdictions as governments, but have them more elastic? And we have to be elastic in our thinking sometimes. So those would be the three greatest economic development challenges that we all face. So the Next Generation Economy Initiative will look at two key areas, as I said. We would be looking at bringing together a large stakeholder of groups that have our economic engine stakeholders on the left and the people that represent our economic foundation. This slide essentially shows on the left, these are just examples, they don't actually exist, but some examples of some industry strategies. So by the end of the strategy, we're actually going to have industry strategies identified, and on the right side we'll actually have strategies that will affect gaps and challenges in our foundation. At the end of it all, it doesn't matter whether it's economic development or community development or what we do in our community. We ultimately all want prosperity, sustainability, equity, and a high quality of life. So everything that we do and decisions that we make should lend us towards these goals. And again, there are measurements to tell us how well we're doing in these particular areas that we would be implementing. So in closing, what I'm proposing is that we implement a broad-based regional economic strategy that's developed, implemented, and supported through a collaboration of our regional stakeholders, including industry, government, institutions, organizations, economic and business development agencies, getting everybody on the same page. That our industry clusters and key industries are identified, priorities set, and action is initiative. And we are also measuring performance, and we are benchmarking that. Also reviewing the economic foundation in 8 ecosystems and measuring and benchmarking those. And finally, implementing a high-performing planning and action system that will take us and a strategy long-term. So the last slide here is some of the areas, if you're interested and are just can't sleep, this will definitely put you to sleep. So click on some of these links and it'll give you a bit of a background around what I'm talking about. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Blythe. That was a very interesting presentation. Are there any questions of Sandra at this time? Mayor Dahl?
Thank you. I gotta get this mic up. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Deputy Mayor Blatz, through you to Sandra. Welcome. That was an excellent presentation. My question to you would be, you've been engaging with the Olds College and you've been engaging with some outside parties, or partners, I should say. Have you sat in any municipal area partnerships with any of the region?
No.
Not to date?
Not to date.
Okay.
Sorry, through Deputy Mayor Blatz. Yes, so the plan would be, right now I'm doing research. I'm trying to find out what exists out there, what resources I have at my disposal or will have at my disposal before embarking on a strategy. I'm trying to save costs. So once we have that, I'm also having discussions with the college and others that I'm meeting with about this strategy and my desire to want to partner. So there's a lot of interest. Mountain View County has, the Economic Development Officer has expressed interest, as well as one of the councilors I've spoken with. The college is very interested in learning about this strategy and how we can work together. And this is the other thing. We have the counties working on an economic strategy. We have communities in our area that are developing economic strategies. We're all going to have all these different strategies, but our industries aren't changing. Our environment's not changing. So is that the best use of our resources? Maybe not.
Thank you. Are there any further, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, and thank you, Sandra, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions, depending on others. One is, what is your plan relative to engaging with the existing business community? I'm thinking more of the small, medium enterprises. I know I read, and you look at other websites, Sundry has just completed a focus group session. I think Innisfail has or is. What are your thoughts there from the existing small, medium enterprises and reaching out to them?
Yeah, for sure. And through you, through Deputy Mayor Blatz. Yes, so there's 2 ways to skin the cat. Business Retention Expansion Program. So I've implemented numerous of these programs in small communities and in half a province. So Business Retention Expansion is going in and actually looking at those 8 bubbles and asking business a lot of questions. It's an extensive survey, so I just did one in Southeast Alberta, and it was about a 45 to almost an hour survey. And we get tons of information. We had over 400 businesses participate in that. And they tell us where they see the issues. So we can do that independently, just with our small businesses, and that's, of course, partnerships with the chambers, with the downtown, uptown group, and there's huge opportunities there. Now, what I can tell you is I've done that survey many times. We've had numerous awards for this. The best thing about it, it's not the survey. I've done them so many times, I can tell you about 70% of what's going to come out of that survey. Doesn't matter what town I'm in or where I'm doing it. Results are largely the same. The best thing about that program, and a lot of communities don't do it this way, it's the engagement of the community. The first time I did one of these, we had 300 volunteers that went out and volunteered to sit down with businesses personally. At the end of that, we had businesses going, that was awesome. I had no idea. I got an opportunity to go in and ask another business about this, and I didn't know anything about that business. I had no idea. He's looking at expanding. We got talking. He'd never used me for my services. Now we've got an agreement on the table. PharmaSafe. The two guys that started PharmaSafe took part in that initial program. Al Chilton is one of the owners of PharmaSafe. And he said to me, Sandra, that project that we did was the reason I went out and started collaborating and got the PharmaSave chain going. That's where the golden ticket is. You gotta meet face to face. You gotta talk to each other. You gotta create trust among not just agencies, but between businesses. You get business in the room, deals happen. But you gotta have the right discussion, right? It's not cocktails. Let's have cocktails and get together. No, it's let's sit down and talk about the warts. What's not working? Why isn't it working? How do we fix it?
Am I allowed to supplement?
Yes, go ahead. I don't see any other questions prior to going back to Councillor. Okay, Councillor Cummins, you're next, and then Councillor Wilson.
Okay. No, and I'm encouraged to hear your words, and yeah, and shame on me for using the word survey. You said exactly what I meant to say or was hoping, and that's in the terms of engagement and the face-to-face, because I know out campaigning, that certainly was a common theme and a common message from the businesses in town is they're all successful, they're all very critical to the community, and they do have a story or information to pass along.
Yeah.
My next question is, so as a new resident to Olds, just curious your observations, and you mentioned the warts. What have you seen now that you're living here in Olds, working here in Olds? What are your aha moments that you've seen?
Well, I gotta tell you, when I saw the Smart Farm and met with the college, that was like, you gotta be kidding me. I look at that and go, the opportunity, then I look at, okay, we got a Smart Farm, we've got fiber in the ground, we have our own power company that hedges cost. We just gotta connect these dots. So we've got communities across Canada that are applying to government to be called a smart community. They don't have a sniff of what you have here. So when we look at the money that's being put into the the incubator. So I had a conversation, this was about 3 weeks ago, and somebody said to me, yeah, we got this incubator, putting a bunch of money into it, and so we're partnering with Calgary, but it's going to be hard to get tech companies here, so I'm not real sure how it's going to work out, and I'm going, you got to be kidding. All we got to do is get out and promote that we're one of the most connected communities. We got to talk about ourselves. The more we get that word out there and communicate and promote our assets, and that's one of the key things that I have to do as well, is get our communication developed. So we can talk about those assets that we have here and connect those dots. So there's tons of funding out there to become a smart community. And I came from Medicine Hat, I can tell you the same thing. Medicine Hat has 3 business arms. They own their own utility. They don't just own a utility, they also develop, transmit, and distribute power. So they're having discussions about what do we do with this electric generation station? Are we still in the business of utility? And they also have a fiber line. Well, you know what? Utility changes. So you look at Scandinavia, the big power companies, Germany, Scandinavia, all over the world, big power companies are looking at transfer of data. Transfer of data, meaning we can automate our streetlights, we can automate so many things in our systems with a simple fiber line in the ground. And we can collect that data and improve and save costs because we can now benchmark and project what our costs, for instance, on the cost of a road that we're maintaining all year and we're dumping gravel on it and salt and whatnot, and it'll tell you over time that road's going to decay. Here's why, because we had this much sun, this much rain, put this much on there. It's things like that. And we're small, which means we're nimble, right? We can't do things, or we can do more than big cities can do because we are small and we can test these really cool things. And we've got a college that's all over it already. So that's what I see. So, you know, I get caught up in the work and, oh God, there's so much to do. Can I do all this as one person? But then I get out and I meet somebody. And that's the other thing. I mean, when I first got here, and full disclosure, I think it was the first week I was here, was the discussion about ONET. And I watched it live stream, right? And I talked to people in the community, and people were like, oh, God, you know, that's not good. My perspective on it was, I saw a room full of passionate community people. I've worked in large cities. You can't find that passion anymore. In a small town, it's people that care about their community. That's passion. It's just how do we get the discussion going in the right way and working together? Because I don't care, whatever happened at the end of that discussion, everybody cares about this community. The goal is the same. It's just how do we get working together?
Councillor Cummins, you have a question, then Mayor Dahl, you have a question as well.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I just want to wrap my head around this whole process in a little short snippet there. So basically, the new development plan priorities or intelligence gathering
Yeah.
from the players themselves to determine what shortcomings are out there in our infrastructure, in our business infrastructure,
Right.
corporate infrastructure, not necessarily water or nothing like that, but then work on developing that process of needs from the business community,
Yeah.
then advertising to the general population out there in the universe that, hey, look, this is what we have.
Yeah.
Rather than to target a particular industry or a particular business or particular opportunity, but all opportunities in general, and say, hey, look, we have the infrastructure to support businesses of all nature here in our town. We've got the fiber, we've got the roads, we've got the rail line, we've got the corridor, we've
Right.
got all this. In a nutshell, that sums up your presentation here today. I think, unless I'm missing some, I'm not to find nuances and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Intelligence gathering, infrastructure advertised to the general world to attract that new industry.
Yeah.
And to support the industry that's already here with that dialogue of what do you as a business group or business people need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so ultimately, what we're looking at is talking to the big dogs first, finding out what do you, because investment attraction is so simple. It's this: reduce imports, increase exports. That's it. So your businesses are importing. I want to find out, what are you importing? Because what you're importing, if there's, and that's the thing, when we have these discussions, you start to connect dots. That one company is not the only company that's importing XYZ. Well, boom, bang, we got 3. Okay, now I go, okay, let's get those 3 companies in a room together. There's opportunity here for synergies, for cost savings, whatever the case may be. So that's the ultimate goal. Reduce imports, increase exports. Whatever it takes to do that. And it also means targeting those companies that are truly going to make a difference. So, a good example right now, which is a weird time, we have new industries coming in that never existed before, right? So we've got cannabis companies that are coming in. So Medicine Hat, we had Aurora. Everybody's all excited. Aurora's coming. They're going to bring all these jobs. And yeah, okay, this is exciting. But they got no links to our economy. God, they're going to be so much work. Because now I got to find out what they need. What do I bring to them? At the same time, we had blockchain technology come in. Oi, again, no links to our community. They use a ton of power, so we're making big money on utility. But everything they do is global. It's got nothing to do with us. They could operate in isolation. Well, they do operate in isolation. They got no tie to the community. So then I'm having discussions with, guys in other countries about, okay, so how do we, you're pulling in all this data. What can you do for the city? Right? So it's those sorts of things. It's a strange time. So you've got new industries, so it's going to be a lot more work. But play to your assets. So what's our agriculture industries need? And if I brought in a company, what should I bring in? What's going to affect your bottom line and make sure you stay here? Those are the things we want to go after. But many communities treat investment attraction. So I'm an honest person. What you see is what you get. Investment attraction often is done like a mosquito in a nudist camp. Let's just go after whatever's out there and we'll bring them in. Well, whatever's out there, is that going to create a specialized economy for you? Is that whatever going to add value to your economy? They may come, but are they going to stay? So that's it.
Thank you. And that's really interesting, Sandra, but we're very well over our 15-minute allotment for this conversation, and I think we must continue it on, because we do have another director waiting to present, and then we have to have a recess.
I think at this point, maybe we'll recess and
Okay,
have
thank you,
lunch
Director Wagstaff.
and then return.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm calling on her. Mayor Dahl, you'd like to make a motion to accept for information, please?
I would just have a final comment.
Oh, sure.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Sandra. So your information sharing is valuable, but I have to say that with the municipality of the town of Olds, we need to learn. We're going to have to educate a little further on the past history of our community for you. A lot of that, the past sustainability work that was done in this community that won awards was very much built on the dialogue you just shared at this table.
Yeah.
The information is there. The businesses have been talked to. A lot of it was done through the municipal area partnerships.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that sometime you can delegate and come and sit to listen to some of that information around the table. It is available, and you're on a good path of recovery, but we don't have to build it from scratch.
Right.
That's just all I'm saying, but thank you for the time.
And I didn't mean to mention that. I have reviewed, and there's some great things, right? Wonderful things and huge collaboration, but we've got to keep that going. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now I would like to call for someone to make a motion to accept this report for information. Councillor Walsh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I move that we accept for information for Economic Development Officer Sandra Blatz.
Thank you so much. All in favor? That motion is carried. I would now like to call a recess for until 1:45 would be appropriate for all folks. Okay.
Given
so-
that we have lunch provided, I think that would be astute.
Yes. We call a recess then until 1:45. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your patience. It is 12:45, and we will now reconvene today's Policies and Priorities Committee meeting. And going forward, moving along with the agenda, we will now have a presentation from Olds Fashion Christmas. Acting CEO Wagstaff, will you please make the introductions?
Thank you. We do have Heather Dixon with us today, Community Facilitator with Community Services, who has been the lead with Olds Fashion Christmas. If she can come forward, please.
Good afternoon. Now that we're getting into November, we're starting to think of Christmas. We're going to, of course, be observing Remembrance Day first, and that's an important day for our country. But after that, it will start to be all things Christmas. So I just wanted to point out, sorry, Director Andrew, can we go back one slide? Thanks. That the Olds Fashion Christmas this year has gotten a brand new logo, and you will see that there on your page. And that was Signs by Jan that donated some time to make us that logo, and our committee just decided on that last, I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago now almost, for our logo. Olds Fashion Christmas has never had a logo before, so this is exciting. All right, next slide. Because some of you are new, I'm going to just quickly go over a bit of history about Olds Fashion Christmas so you can understand the event and where it came from. So it came out of the Town of Olds Tourism Action Committee in 1993. So we are coming up, this is the 28th year of Olds Fashion Christmas. Sharon Carey was a co-chair of that tourism action committee, and had the idea for Olds Fashion Christmas based on an event she had read about while she had been in Washington State. In 1996, there was a community meeting called by the Town of Olds, where about 75 to 80 people attended. At that time, Carolyn Bodmer and Rita Thompson became the coordinators of the event, and it was to remain an event of the Town of Olds due to insurance and so many groups being involved. At that time, the coordinators were given an office at the Town of Olds admin building and began to work out of that. The group had an office at the Town of Olds until 2012, when the Town of Olds needed that office space. That group also used to have annual retreats for visioning and planning with an outside facilitator. And then also during that time, Stuart Ray was here with the Town of Olds, and he made a memorandum of agreement with the Olds Fashion Committee in regards to that old pool building that's by the splash park. And inside there you will find the Kiwanis Heritage Village. That's where it is stored in the winter months, as well as all of the decorations, extra lights, things like that for Olds Fashion Christmas. The building, I will also just mention, is also used by the Olds Art Club and Mountain View Art Society to store some of their things as well. About 2012, Lorraine Pillar, who was with the Town of Olds at that time, was directed by the administration to assist the Olds Fashion Christmas event as it was starting to grow quite a bit. At that time, there was a vision and guiding principle developed by the group. Oops, what did I do? Sorry, Director Andrew. There was, in 2000, a new part of Olds Fashion Christmas, and that was the introduction of a town crier. The town crier was supported financially by Olds Fashion Christmas for the costuming and travel at that time. And just recently, in the last few years, we no longer have that Olds town crier. He has since moved. He is here for some months during the summer, but was unable to continue those duties with us. So that's something that has changed over the last few years. And generally speaking, Olds Fashion Christmas is an umbrella of many, many events that start at the end of October and go all the way to the end of December. However, as we know, COVID has thrown a wrench into many of these plans, and this is the first year that you will not see a calendar of events in the paper. That's a long green sheet that used to come in the paper. People look for it because it has all of the events. Unfortunately, this year, many of the groups decided not to do events just because it was so uncertain. Last last year, a lot of them had to cancel events at the last minute. There was a lot of money put out, and they weren't feeling comfortable doing that again this year. So what we've done with the groups that were still interested, we have a marketing coordinator, and she is doing all sorts of social media releases for the different events that are happening, and we're looking at some other innovative ways to get the information out as well to people. All right, next slide. So just to continue on, so in 2019, we had some challenges. We lost the volunteer event coordinator, and then we also got some notice from 5 of our long-term volunteers that they were no longer going to be with the event. After 20 some odd years, we appreciated their hard work and their laying of the groundwork for Old Fashioned Christmas and what it has now become. Another challenge was that our event was growing in popularity. In 2018, we saw roughly 2,500 people in the Cow Palace. That was a lot of people. And we only had budget for about 180 animal balloons and about 200 to 250 kids for their face painting. So that gives you an idea of the volume of people versus what kind of a budget that we had. So not everybody was getting their faces painted. Not everybody was, being able to do all the fun things. So we started thinking about ways that we could involve everybody. So that was a challenge that we met, and we're excited at looking at moving forward. That year in 2019, the success again was the increased number of attendees. That was on both sides. The great legacy that was left by the long-term volunteers with information to lead a successful transition moving forward. Many volunteers from that time were willing to help in years coming, so that was good. Then we rolled over to 2020, and we did not anticipate the challenges that were coming with COVID. So we had 2 years back-to-back with challenges. Some of our challenges obviously were the COVID-19 restrictions. The 2 days before we were to have the Winter Wonderland walkthrough, we had new restrictions put out by Alberta Health. So that quickly had to change what we were doing, and a number of families chose not to come due to health reasons, obviously. So that changed for us again, but the people who did come were so very excited that we were doing something to bring some Christmas joy and cheer. Successes were that we have creative and flexible volunteers. Last year I watched that group come together, bounce ideas around, and come out with some really, really great outcomes, as well as being able to change things at the last minute and still be a very cohesive, flexible, and happy group moving forward. And then appreciative community members. Last year we couldn't do the parade, the normal parade, so our group did the Santa's Merry Motorcade. We had 2 different groups going with 5 to 7 parade floats in each group. One did the west side of town, one did the east side of town, and we drove around with Santa and Mrs. Claus and those parade floats up and down the streets of Olds. The amount of feedback that we had on our Facebook Lives, as well as our Facebook pages, and even emails coming into council and to administration, was fantastic. People appreciated that Christmas joy, and it certainly was fun to drive down the streets and see people peering out their windows, as well as their dogs. A lot of dogs enjoyed our drive-bys as well. There was some barking. Finally, our successes were fireworks. Normally, that's not something Old Fashioned Christmas does. Last year, the council was kind enough to help Old Fashioned Christmas, and we were able to do some fireworks. And that was well received by the community. Next slide, sir. I just wanted to give you an overview of what the committee now looks like. There's myself. I am kind of the coordinator. What that means is I have people that are heads of each of the areas, and we have right now we're actually into our weekly meetings before the event is happening on November 20th. So these people are in charge of the parade, sponsorship areas, marketing, indoor event spaces, decorating, and parade and venue information. So there's many people that are part of this group, as well as many groups outside that are doing things. For example, the Kiwanis, they were in the park last week putting up the village. We do that before it gets too cold. None of the lights obviously will be shining on that till November 20th, but the buildings themselves are up. We had Olds Electric help us fix some of the trees in the park, so the trees will all be lit up and looking great this year. The Hospice Society was there putting up their lights on the Tree of Remembrance. We have involvement from the Olds College Broncos. The last few years, we could not have done this event without the Olds College Broncos. They have just been instrumental in helping us get the village up, parade barricades, decorating, taking everything down. They have been an amazing group. And then finally, the ORE, they are just a great group of people to work with when we're trying to do Old Fashioned Christmas, and they have been there for this event since conception pretty much, so we are really blessed to have them as part of our team as well. And then finally, I just thought I would show you this year what our plan is as a committee. On November 20th, which is a Saturday, this is the schedule for the actual light up event evening. This is the same weekend as Midnight Madness. We have joined with Uptown Olds and ORE to do some advertising for this entire weekend. So this again is just for the event, the light up event on Saturday evening. So 5 p.m. the Hospice Tree of Remembrance will be lit up, and they have a small ceremony for people who have lost loved ones this year. So that will be occurring at 5 p.m. in Centennial Park. At 5:25, the lights in Centennial Park will be illuminated throughout the entire park. 5:30 p.m. there will be a parade. This year, the parade committee has decided to do something a little different. We'll be running the parade down 50th Street. So from Olds College, that's where the lineup will be. They'll be heading down 50th Street all the way to 57th Avenue. So it'll be a straight run through parade. Some of the reason for that is with the market that happens at the Cow Palace. It just got to be too congested and too many vehicles and people in that area. So if we go straight down, then that gives the vendors from the market time to get out and safely remove all of their things, and no traffic backups or confusion there. So that's the parade part. From 6 p.m. till 8 p.m., we're going to have events in the Cow Palace, not like they have been in the past. We will have an entertainment area, socially distanced photos with Santa, hot chocolate and cookies, and goodie bags and craft bags for the kids to pick up. So the Cow Palace is running, they are running at a third capacity, which means that at any one given time, 400 people could be in that large Cow Palace building. We are going to have people stationed at one side and at the other, just like at the farmers markets this summer. They were counting as they came in, counting as they go out. There'll be communication between both people so that we do not run over that limit. People, of course, are going to have to wait their turn to get in. There won't be any mingling encouraged. You go in, we have some music playing. It will be instrumental, so there's no singing. As our guidelines say, that there's no singing allowed. We will be telling people they must be masked. Then they'll just kind of wander in, get their little bags at each station, get their hot chocolate and cookies to go, and get their socially distanced photo with Santa. So that's there. And then the lovely firefighters here in Olds are not at all excited to help us with fireworks this year. So we will be doing fireworks again, and we're able to do that this year based on the fact that we're not doing some of the same things that we usually do in the Cow Palace. So we have a little more leeway with budget. And those fireworks are at 8:15. Some feedback we got from parents was that earlier fireworks would be nice. Canada Day, those little people have to stay up till 11 to see fireworks, so it's a lot of fun when they get to see them a little earlier, and I'm sure the parents appreciate the less cranky children the next day. So that is Old Fashioned Christmas plans this year. Our committee, some of them were going to try to come today, but with most of them, not most of them, I'm sorry, all of them have daytime jobs, so they are volunteering their time in the evening, so they do regret not being here, but they have sent me with their blessing. So that's all we have for you. And if there's any questions, I will do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Mrs. Dixon, for that presentations. I will now open the floor to any questions anyone may have of our presenter. Mayor Dahl.
I don't want this to go off on me again, it's just all over. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, through you. I would like to ask, when did you say the beginning, did you say 28 years? So, and I remember when Sharon Carey brought it to the town of Olds, for sure. So 1995?
So I just did quick math in my head. That I had to add a year. It started in 1992, so that would make us 29 years this year, because so next year will be the 30th anniversary.
So 1992 was the start.
Was the very first, yes.
And can you share, I know that all the Santa trucks were done by volunteers who built their own staging for their trucks, and it was a motorcycle club. It was Clint?
For what part?
Well, you talked about the drive around Santa
Oh,
trucks.
the Merry Motorcade, yes, yeah.
So
those were people that actually had registered to be in our parade, and we just changed we let them know that we couldn't have the parade. If they were interested in being part of the Merry Motorcade, that they could then do that. So yes, they did decorate their own vehicles, for sure.
I had the opportunity to go see the work they were doing on building the sets for those, and kudos to them. They were out almost every night for like 2 months, and well, thank you very much for sharing that.
Director Wagstaff, you have a comment to make.
Yes, so what you're referring to, Mayor Dahl, is an individual on their own, an individual business on their own, decided just because of COVID, just to drive the community in their own truck at their own expense to bring some cheer. So that's one of the great positives of an example again in our community of just citizens stepping up to do it. That wasn't part of Olds Fashion Christmas. That was something separate. But you're right. They've already indicated they're going to be out again doing it this year, but that is separate from this.
And that was Lazy Eye Illusions. And they actually just had a Halloween truck that was going around this last week. They had a Valentine's Day truck last year. And so they were part of our parade to begin with. And then they had said to me, do you think it's okay if we just drive around on other nights to bring Christmas cheer? And I'm like, absolutely. So I believe they actually had 2 different trucks last year going with Christmas things on them. And so I'm sure we're going to see them around again this year. I know my little granddaughter was thoroughly excited to see the Halloween truck this last week. So yeah, keep an eye out for them.
And just to add, the fire truck as well. The fire truck was out on Halloween. The fire truck was out this summer spraying the kids, so they're all over the place. We're very lucky.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. We'll go to Councillor Cummins and then Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Just a quick question there, just for clarification. You had mentioned that the Cow Palace was working at 1/3 capacity, so it is not restrictions exemption program engaged.
No, they're at a 1/3 capacity ruling. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, and I just wanted to point out our police officers were out on Halloween night too. Through you to Ms. Dixon, do you have a date for when setup will be occurring, and you've got volunteers already waiting in the wings for that?
So I will find out that information tomorrow night at our meeting. So the crew that does all the decorating as well as the venue setup, they will have a report to me tomorrow evening with a floor plan as well as time and such. So as soon as we have that, then we'll kind of know what day that is. The Olds College Broncos will be helping set up again this year. And then, of course, there are some things that the operations group does for us. And so we usually give them a heads up about 2 weeks prior to that event where we need parade barricades and so on and so forth. And if it snows, then we make sure that we have things, plowed and ready to go for those parade floats and such. So there's a lot of work that goes in, but we have it all on a timeline for sure.
Are there any further? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I just wanted to thank Heather for the report and also pass along thanks to your volunteer committee and all the volunteers. To me, these are special events that help build the community, especially in these times, so it's important that we keep these events going. And similar to Councillor Ryan's question, I think you addressed, so you haven't had any issue pulling together people for your committees, or has it been more a voluntold type situation? And
So I have a good core group of volunteers that I pull on for Canada Day, and that has been a very successful group. Last year, when COVID hit and things needed to change, then I was able to call on some of those people to be on the Old Fashioned Christmas group as well, and they've actually ended up staying on. So if they tell you that they did it because I told them they had to, that's not true. Many people love Christmas, so Old Fashioned Christmas is a really easy one to get people out and helping for. So so last year, honestly, there were some more challenges with volunteering. I think people this year, there's more of an understanding of COVID. There's more of an understanding of what we can do to make ourselves safe. Some people have their vaccinations, and with vaccinations and masking and, hand cleaning and all of those things, people are feeling more comfortable. However, we still want to be respectful of people that aren't feeling that comfort level as well. And so that's why, making sure that we're adhering to that 1/3 capacity and providing masks at the door and hand sanitizer and all of those things, because our community safety is our utmost concern. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions before I return to Councillor Wilson?
I just had one quick question.
Okay, seeing none, then you go ahead, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Are you going to be cooking hot dogs again?
No, there will be no hot dogs this year. Sorry. This year it's hot chocolate and cookies. It's easier to take those in your hands. Not as many people standing around milling about putting ketchup and such on their dogs. So hot chocolate and cookies. Maybe next year. We'll be positive and hope for hot dogs next year.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? I just have a couple of comments. And again, thank you, Ms. Dixon, for your excellent report on Old Fashioned Christmas. I assume will there be some kind of recognition for our long-term volunteers? Or are they asking? I know they would never ask for any, for sure. And I know they probably don't want any kind of special recognition.
Yeah,
but
so
will
a
there
few
be
years
anything?
ago, so when they were done in 2019, there was some, what's the word? Sorry, recognition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you are right. They were not wanting the spotlight, but there was something done for them.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. And my last comment then, so if we're going to go with the parade route directly along 50th, that will go directly past the lodge, won't it?
Exactly.
So then everyone will get an opportunity. That's wonderful.
And then we're hoping Lazy Eye Illusions will go by the other lodges that aren't on our parade route.
That's right. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So seeing no further questions or comments, I would ask for a motion to accept the Old Fashioned Christmas report for information. Councillor Daly?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I'd like to move that we accept the Old Fashioned Christmas report as presented.
We'll call the question then. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you so much. Moving along then, I will ask if there's any business arising from the minutes or any unfinished business. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I was just wondering, through you to Director Wagstaff, or Acting CEO Wagstaff, on the wayfinding from the minutes, I was just curious about signs that will go up for probably the next go-around, I would imagine. Would we be directing visitors to any shopping areas? I was asked this during the campaign, and I didn't know if we would or not, and I thought maybe I'd just ask, since it was in the minutes, like directing them to Uptown Olds or down to Cornerstone or something like that. Do we have any plans for that?
Yes, and some of the signs that you see up currently do have directions to Uptown, so it doesn't specify that it's shopping center, but it does specify Uptown. And then we have shopping center on some of the signs. It's directing them to the West End. So that was the decision around those two items.
Okay, so not directly saying Uptown Olds shopping area or historic Uptown Olds or whatever, but or Cornerstone for shopping, but the generalities is what we're looking at.
Correct. So it does reference Uptown Olds and shopping center, which is the West End.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions for business arising or unfinished business? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much. We will move along now to bylaws. Page 65, the rates bylaw, and Acting CEO Wagstaff, if you'd like to introduce, I believe it will probably be Ms. Linderman.
That is correct. We'll ask Director Linderman.
Thank you. So being presented today is the proposed 2022 rates bylaw. Just a little bit of history for our new councillors. Prior to 2019, we had all of the rates in their specific bylaws. In 2019, we moved to amalgamate them all into one bylaw that is reviewed annually. So today being presented is the 2021-19 bylaw. Once this is passed, it will repeal the previous 2021 rates bylaw. So the only changes being presented today are to Schedule A, water, wastewater, and solid waste. We are presenting a 5-cent increase to the water consumption and an 8-cent increase to the wastewater consumption. And these are the charges that are being passed on to us by the commission. So generally we increase our rates at the same rate as the commissions do. And then in Schedule K, we have our off-site levies. And again, this is done annually at 1.8%. Since our 2016 review was done, is when we started increasing by, it was an average inflation rate that they chose to increase by. And I did also want to mention in 2022, we will be doing both an off-site levies review and a comprehensive rates review. And I will just open it up to any questions.
Thank you for that, Director Linderman. Going forward then, I have Councillor Cummings, then Councillor Daly. All right, Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Just a couple of quick questions, Director Lindeman. When I reviewed the bylaw and then I reviewed our neighboring communities' bylaws, I noticed one kind of oddity, and I just want to know if there's an actual accounting policy in the department. We're the only ones, and only in our water, wastewater rates do we measure to the penny. Every other dollar amount on the chart is to the nickel. I know it seems weird, but most accounting policy is across the board that you do or don't round to the nickel. And we don't. We're also the only community that does that, like presents these two rates to the penny, whereas every other community rounds them off to the nickel or even the dollar in most cases. Is there a reason why like a 1.8% increase in offsite levies would guarantee a penny calculation, but we don't present that penny calculation? So to me, that seems like it's a policy that we don't do pennies, except for water and wastewater. Am I offbeat on that, or is that a correct assessment?
So I had never considered that before, actually, but we do not have a policy on that at all. No, and I can't speak to why the 1.8%, as that was previous to me, but it was recommended by our consultants at the time to use that as our inflation rate. But there is no policy as to why we round or don't round or.
Thank you, sorry. Then that does make a confusion for me, because in one sections in Schedule K, we obviously are rounding. Because again, regardless of what rate we're using, 1.8% will always make a penny calculation. So in that part, Schedule K, we're rounding, but in the water, wastewater, we don't round. To me, it's confusing when we're showing our rate users who use, I mean, the wastewater, and water is the most used rate out there, and we're providing these 3-cent and whatnot cent rates that are very unique to our community from our surrounding community where they've all rounded. I know I might be nitpicking here, but I would rather see a consistency in the entire budget or in the entire bylaw where we round to the nickel and or dollar, whichever one is the most convenient, rather than throwing out $12.83 a month as a rate to our taxpayer. Simply say something similar to $13, whereas our communities have $12 and $14 as their base rates. And the $2.94 simply become $3. Something like that in a rounding principle, so that the rates look easier to read and consistent with the rates throughout the entire bylaw. Can we look at that? I don't know the procedure in asking for that, so I'm new. So I don't know if that's something we would ask at a later date when we're looking at the bylaw to have it amended to be consistent from one page to the other. or if that's something we can just have a discussion about and say, hey, is that something we can look at doing?
Yes, oh, most definitely. And sorry, I misunderstood your first question, but I'm there now. Yeah, and that could be, definitely it's council's prerogative if you want to do that for this bylaw. We have time, we can still change that. But that could be something, as I said, as we do the comprehensive rates review in 2022, that we can definitely look at. And that is part of what my hope is, that the municipal finance intern position, if that goes through, that person will be looking at that and looking at all neighboring surrounding communities to get that information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Director Lindeman, again, being new on the council, what is the formulation, or how do we come up with our rates for the water and solid waste, or wastewater calculations right off the bat? I know we're on a regional pipeline, so it probably is related to that, but how does the town of Olds come up with their pricing?
So we do full cost accounting for our water, wastewater, and solid waste. So no taxes subsidize those rates at all. And there, as you know, is a variable and a fixed component to those rates. So we take all of the expenses related to each individual department, break it out into the fixed variable, divide by the amount of customers or the consumption, and that's how those rates are come to. And then, as I said, when the commissions raise their rates, we in turn have to raise ours in order to keep that balance.
Subsequent question. So to go along with that, we're always talking about economic development and building our community and attracting people to our community. As that number goes up, is that going to change our rate as for water and wastewater, being that we'd be using up more capacity of the pipeline? Is that something to take into consideration when we're looking at these decisions?
Sorry, I'm not
Well,
sure if I...
when you look at other utilities, for instance, electrical, the more electricity you use on your premise, going from a residential to maybe to a farm to a business, your price goes up per unit of electricity because, of course, your consumption goes up. Would that be the same because we're using up more capacity of the regional pipeline? Would that make that capacity more valuable?
Oh, okay. And honestly, I don't know that I can answer that. Someone that's on maybe one of the commissions, or Director Wagstaff.
I was going to say two things. Not that we're aware of with regards to the agreements, but we're going to look into that and get back to council so we can be firm on that answer. But I'm not aware of, in the time that I've been here, that we've ever discussed that the rates go up with our percentage of the, literally, the percentage of the pipe.
Good. Thank you very much.
Director Andrew, you have a comment to add to this?
Yeah, I'm far from the expert on this either, but I do recall from a previous conversation where with the wastewater pipeline in particular, there was a requirement of a minimum flow that had to be met because of the capacity upgrades at the Red Deer water treatment facility. So we are actually responsible for paying for a minimum amount, and if we don't meet it, we pay regardless. So I'm not sure, again, in excess, but the minimums are definitely a concern.
Thank you for that. Any further comments or concerns? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I guess I just have a comment and maybe a question or two if I'm allowed. One concerning the rate structure within water, and given all the excitement and interest in the community, my only comment would be I think we need to be very careful. I'm not in favor of taking a $2.94 rate and rounding up to $3. I would prefer we round it down to $2.90. But I'd say just a comment. And then Director Linderman, can you help me understand with the rates and maybe further to Councillor Daly's question? We use water to recover costs for other things than the actual operating cost of the water, correct? Meaning, do we not use rates to pay for some capital projects, to pay for debt, to pay to replenish or add to reserves, as well as the commission cost, as well as our own operating costs, correct?
Correct. So it is complete full cost of that utility is incorporated into the rates. We don't necessarily build our reserves. If there is a surplus or a deficit in any given year, that is where we do have a utilities reserve that goes up and down with that. But the rates are set, as you said, to cover capital, debentures, everything.
Go ahead, I've got Councillor Ryan, and then we'll go back to Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Through you to Director Lindeman. So, question on the 1.8% increase to all levies. This is an automatic increase that was determined by independent reviewer, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. In 2016, I believe it was, there was a review done of our offsite levies.
Right.
And prior to that, we were not increasing by inflation annually, and so we were behind. And so that review said at the minimum, you need to at least be doing this annually, which is what we have incorporated.
And I just supplemental to that, are we seeing that the costs are that 1%, 1.8% in that bracket, or are they lower or higher? So in other words, we're keeping up with inflation, but is inflation 1.8% or is inflation higher than that? And are we covering our costs, or do we even really need to make the increase every single year just because of it was mandated back in 2016? So I'm just asking.
So we don't have to make the increase. It was just a recommendation. As far as inflation, I don't know specific to construction costs what inflation is, but I do know, obviously, so for 2021, inflation was 1.34%, and then now for 2022, we're saying it's about 2.34, so it does vary. This was an average, I believe, from 2005 to 2015. That was the average construction inflation rate.
Okay, thank you.
Director
Lindeman has answered the comment I was going to add.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatt. So a further question for Director Linderman regarding the water rates. So, and I'm not sure if this is the forum to ask the request, but I'll do it anyway. Is it possible to get, for 2021 budget year and or 2020 and or 2019, kind of get a breakdown of the revenues that were collected for water rates and how they would be split out between the actual cost related to operating the water on our side, the actual cost to the commission, the actual cost for debt and principal payment, and the actual cost for capital projects. Because again, I'm just thinking to concerns I hear from residents, they would like some of that information. They would like to understand if water, or how water rates are being apportioned across those 4 or 5 buckets. Is that possible to do?
Yes, you bet it is. I will bring that to a future council meeting. During budget, we'll bring it.
And one more, if I may.
I just want to add to that too. Another thing that we want, when I bring that, I also would like to bring comparable tax rates. Because that's one thing, yes, Olds has high water utility rates, but our taxes in relation to our surrounding communities is lower, right? So you have to be watching when you're comparing, if you're comparing to other municipalities that also follow the full cost accounting.
Okay, is your supplemental, Councillor Wilson, because I see Councillor Ryan and Councillor Cummings also have questions.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatt. So just one question, maybe one comment. So along those same lines, and maybe again, it'll come out in the budget or down the road, but just an idea and of the input, and we talked a little bit before, the water coming into the town versus the water that we're actually billing on the back end. That information would be helpful as well.
Yep, and we will get our new director. He can present that information coming up in the next couple council meetings.
And my very brief comment, again, based on discussions we had way back when, I agree with you. It's the kind of the total cost of ownership in Olds, and that's why I like what some municipalities do in terms of showing, okay, here's your property tax that you pay, here's franchise fees, here's your water rates, so you can see that total picture all at once, because otherwise it can be misleading to just look at individual buckets.
Definitely, and that actually is a great idea for our 2022 budget booklet, to have a page specific to that.
Thank you.
Councillor Ryan and then Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz, and I also just wanted to put out there that we do winter averaging, and that might be something else that you might want to include in that, Director Lindeman, because I'm not sure that all the councillors around the table know what that is and how much that costs as well. And that is a benefit to the community. We don't subsidize the water, but we kind of do with that, so.
Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. So a little bit of my ignorance off the bat here. We've talked about this at several different meetings now. What exactly is an off-site levy?
So these are levies that developers pay when they purchase and want to develop a section of land or an area. And they are put into reserves here. They pay so much per acre, as set out in our bylaw. We put them into reserves, and they're to be used for future if we need to, because of that development, need to upgrade roads in the future, need to upgrade our water reservoir, anything like that. Those, and they're very specific in the MGA as to what you can use them for. So it has to be, so if I purchased and developed over here, that anything we are building later on to increase, if there's increased demand to our reservoir, increase to our wastewater, pump stations, whatever, that person's levy can only go to this section of the town. Sorry.
Can I have a supplementary question to that as well?
Yeah, as long as it's supplemental, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So would those off-site levies then be paid when the development plan comes in or when the developer develops the property?
It's when they sign the development agreement that they pay it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Any further comments or questions for Director Lindeman at this point? Seeing none, then I would ask for a motion to accept this for information and request it be brought back to a future council meeting. Councillor Cummins?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. My first motion ever. So I would put a motion forward that we move, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. That we move this report on the bylaw 2021-19 to a future council meeting. Almost. Except for information and bring back to a future council meeting.
I will now call the question. All in favor? Thank you so much. Moving along now to our agenda, we will go under new business, our budget survey, and Acting CAO Wagstaff, who is presenting this. Or should I just...
Everything finance goes to Director of Finance.
Thank you. You'll have to excuse me because previously it was our community facilitator who would present this engagement portion. I do the number part. So throughout September and into October, we ran our citizen budget survey. This was our 5th one. Participants were asked to, based on their satisfaction of the specific budget areas, how they would adjust their property tax funding. So they could increase, decrease, keep the same. And then if they chose to increase the funding, would they also support a tax rate increase to do so? So I'll just quickly run through each area. So this year we had 155 responses. This is down slightly from last year. We had just over 200 last year. And in 2019, we had about 315. So we've seen a reduction a few years in a row. This one was a shorter survey in the previous ones, actually, so it took approximately just under 8 minutes to complete. Moving on to our first department, we had operational services, and overwhelmingly, we had keep the same at 46%. And then if you go down, it was a no to increase funding in order to increase that service level. I'm not going to go through any of the comments. I did make a note right at the beginning of the survey. All the comments are exactly as they came in. There was no editing done whatsoever to them. They are exactly as they were inputted by the residents. Within protective services, again, the most picked answer was keep the same, and then we did have about 51% that would like to see an increase. But then moving on to a tax rate increase, there was a no for that as well. And this, I should mention off the bat, this, all of these we have kept it the same over the years. And looking back at last year, the responses are about almost identically the same. Last year it was all keep the same. And then this year, again, overwhelmingly, it's keep the same. Moving into community services, we had, the top answer was keep the same, but as you can see, when you add up within, the decrease was at 40% as opposed to a 29% increase. And again, they would not support a tax rate increase. Recreational facilities, the most chosen, again, was keep the same, but on the flip side of this one, when you add up all the increases, they came in at 44%. But then moving on to a tax rate increase, we again have a 61% at no. Parks and trails, again, keep the same, but increase was at 42%. Again, without a tax rate increase. Planning and development, keep the same. And again, no tax rate increase. There's a theme. Economic development. This one is a little bit closer, actually, within the keep the same and then the increase. So residents are, I think, wanting to see a bit of an increase within economic development. But again, without a tax rate increase. Lots of comments to read through on those areas. We did ask, it was an open-ended question, are there specific services that you would like to see expanded? So there was quite a few comments within there. Let council read those at their own. And again, another open-ended question, if you would like to see reduced or eliminated. And again, lots of great comments in there for council to look through. For the services primarily funded directly from our tax dollars, what area do you feel should receive the greatest attention? It was interesting when I looked back again at 2021's, or 2020's budget for 2021. It was the same three top ones, but just in a different order. So the top three is kind of staying the same with protective services, operational services, and economic development. Just for note, last year operational services was the top. Moving on to future priorities. Again, it was pretty much the same as last year. This year we have our top at debt reduction, crime and safety, road maintenance. Last year it was road maintenance, debt reduction, and economic development. But within this, the top six were all the same priorities, just in a different order. And then the final question, which is always a great indicator, thinking about the programs and services you receive from the town of Olds, would you say overall you get, again, we had fairly good value for your tax dollar, was at 58%. That is exactly the same as at 2020, which is a good indicator. Looking at, so very good actually went up by 1%, very poor has gone down, and fairly poor has gone down. So I think that that's a good indicator that generally residents feel they do receive a good value for their tax dollar. And then the last page was just some demographics on the people filling out the survey. As you can see, about 43% were from that 35 to 44 age group, and most are residential owners. And I would just open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Director Linderman. Do I have any questions? Councillor Cummins?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Director Lindeman, we had a total of 133 responses. If we use the number of eligible voters as the number of adults that live in Olds, what kind of a percentage are we looking at there?
I would actually have to look at, Marcy, if you know how many eligible voters. Do you remember offhand? Sorry, we will get this number for you.
As the 2016 census, it was 7270, and they've just completed the census, but they've not released their numbers, and I would suspect that we'll probably be in the, I'm going to make a guess, at around 89 or 9200 for the town of Olds. That's my guess, and I'm waiting to see what the census is when they release it, which I'm anticipating to be anytime, actually. That was the federal census, not ours.
Director Wagstaff, you have a comment in regards to that?
Well, we may have to get back to you, but we have done that calculation before on some of our other engagements to know, for our validity rate, just what a strong, validity would be. But at 133, it's not going to be a very high percentage of roughly 7,000.
No, my rough calculations at the 8,200 estimate was 1.6%, which the word you use, their validity of the analysis here is lacking tremendously. I know it's the only option we have. We don't have a lot of options in getting people, because we have to have the engagement, and if they don't want to engage, they're not going to engage, so it's hard to get that feedback back. I understand this is probably the best way to do that. But at 1.6%, how much weight do we actually put on the responses that we're getting here? Because we all know that the very farly opinionated on that side and the very farly opinionated on this side tend to be the people who speak and not the people in the middle.
Director Wagstaff and then Mayor Dahl, Councillor Ryan.
And as you know, with any decision council makes, that when we do engagements, that's just one of the data points that we use. There's, when you come to your decision making, there will be many other pieces of data that you get. Sometimes it's debt limits, sometimes it's expenses, sometimes it's, master plans that guide it, priority needs, all of those pieces all come together. This is just one data point. And with our engagement policy, we have a spectrum of engagement. And when we do a survey like this, that's on the consult level. So it's an opportunity for us to obtain some stakeholder feedback. The return rate does also give you something to consider, because we did an earlier engagement where we had a return rate that was, as an example, cannabis had, when we did a cannabis engagement, it was well over 1,000, that gave us that feedback. When we did the community standards bylaw last year, there was, 700-ish in a response on our engagement with that. So yes, that's one of the things you consider, but at the same time, the process itself, as we heard earlier, of doing and engaging and reaching out and going through that is very valuable. And you're going to look for those gold nuggets to pull out. The example being in this one that was highlighted is economic development. We had consistent answers that were the same as previous years, that were consistent throughout. You could exchange whether it was operations or community services, you could exchange those and have basically the same answer. But that's not the case with economic development. So we're not going to ignore that. It's going to be one of the pieces that we take into consideration. But again, it's just one data point.
Mayor Dahl?
Thank you. Director Wagstaff, or Acting CAO Wagstaff, pretty well pinpointed part of what I wanted to say. And I guess another area I'd say is to measure that when you start looking at your report a problem, 2 responses, that tool has been a very well-used tool in the past, and it really surprised me to see that, because there's every opportunity to fill. It's easy to fill in and easy to put across the board to the right department. And then you can also tell by reading all the comments in here, obviously, Fire Chief Andrew, there was a lot of hot topic and discussion with protective services, especially fire department. And then a lot of talk about the planters on the Highway 27 popped up quite a bit. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to say acting CAO Wagstaff at this point today. And yeah, it's unpredictable.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Just a notation on the flower pots. We cut back significantly over the past 2 years, and you know, it seems like we get an awful lot of positive remarks, but they don't ever seem to show up in this particular survey. It seems to be only the people who think that there's far too many, but I know there's lots of very positive comments that come in regards to that.
Supplemental, it's the location. It's the boulevard on Highway 27 that I read.
Yeah, well, but we cut that back significantly too. So anyway, moving along then to Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I just wanted to say, you might have only a small portion of people responding, but you may not get the same people responding year after year. And also, you do see that there is not just one side. When you read through the comments, there's people who like the flowers, there's people who don't like the flowers. You know, you're talking about a $25,000 budget, so it's not a huge amount of money that's spent on flowers, and yet it enhances the beauty of the community. So you have to gauge how much of the budget it is taking up, and for people to harp on the flowers is just, I don't understand it. But, you know, and then you have people who want to see increases in departments, but they don't want to pay anything extra. And you can't have it both. It costs money, $150,000 to put in one RCMP officer. So, you know, probably around the same amount. I'm not 100% sure about with the fire department, but if you were going to put a secondary, another deputy chief in, these things cost money. And so, you know, so you have people who want to increase things and they don't want to pay for them. You can't have it both ways. I do appreciate all the comments that we get from the community, regardless of whether or not we agree with them. It's really good feedback and something to always put in the back of your mind. And also, their comments can generate more engagement, public engagement in the future, such as with the garbage last year. You know, we had this kind of responses from people in the budget survey who talked about our garbage pickup. We did do a survey in the summer with regards to seeing if people would pay extra for garbage pickup, and it was, you know, people didn't want to, so you end up getting an opportunity from this budget and the comments that are being made to do other kinds of public engagements going forward. And I think that that's valuable, and I think this kind of survey is valuable as well. So, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. I just have a brief comment and then perhaps a question either for acting CEO Wagstaff or for Director Linderman. That is, what is a red flag for me is the decline in the response rate, certainly year over year and over the last 2 years. I'm not sure what that represents and reflects, the temperature of the day, events going on in the community, or what have you. And part of it maybe gets to how we solicit the feedback in the surveys. I realize we do it online, which is convenient and easy. Not a lot of, or a segment of the population that may have difficulty or not have access to an online. But I'd be curious from either the acting CEO or from Deputy Linderman, what your navel gazing and speculation is as to why the response rates come down so much over the last year or two, or come down over the last year or two.
Your Wagstaff? Or
Well,
CEO Wagstaff?
to start with, it's a vast improvement of when we used to do it, engagements in person. We would do them here or at the Legion, and we would, you know, and this is not an exaggeration, have a person or two come out for an engagement when we did it in person. So comparatively, this has been an improvement. With that, the answer is actually in the question that you asked, because it's a whole variety of things. You know, did COVID exhaustion play a role? Did the election, on the eve of an election, did that play a role? Did we push it differently because we were on the eve of an election? Yes, we did some different tactics out there not to become an influencer in that process. So we didn't go out as aggressively this time as we have in previous engagements to, you know, to get people's involvement, because we were very conscious of the fact that we were essentially in an election period. So that probably played a role. I think the biggest part, more than anything, is the fact that we didn't use the same exact tactics that we've used in some previous ones.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. Just a quick follow-up then. Where does this information go from here? Is it going to be put on the website? Is it going to be made public?
Yes, so this gets posted on our website from here.
So including all the comments or just the overall review?
The entire report. will
Okay,
be
perfect.
posted.
No, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Member Latson. I might also just add to Councillor Daly's question would be that we do discuss it during our budget deliberations as well. So it does come up, and we it does carry some weight, and certainly all the comments are from people are valid, and so we have to consider them regardless of how many numbers of people have responded. So.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions? Oh, Director Wagstaff.
And for the public as well as some of the new councillors, on our website, we do have olds.ca/engagement, and all of our engagements are there, as well as the follow-up reports that go with it. So the public or yourselves are able to go back and peruse through engagements we've done in the past.
Thank you. Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Blatz. This is an odd question. I'm not sure you'll be able to provide me the answer to this one off the top of your head. When the town decided to go to statistical analysis like this, did we engage some outside agency to assist us with that? And if we did they provide you the statistical sample size needed for proper analysis?
So previously, I think the past 4, we have used an outside service to put up or host, I guess, the survey. As far as providing the sample size, I'm not sure. This year, we actually did it all in-house, though. We did it through SurveyMonkey, and it was all done in-house, savings of a couple $1,000s. We felt we weren't getting the value with using that contractor when we could do it in-house. But I don't know if Director Wagstaff knows the sample size.
There's lots of research out there that gives you different sample sizes for your different types of surveys that you do. We've looked at anything, you know what, no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to email council that answer, because we have looked at that. We do have an answer for what we would consider to be statistically valid for our surveys. So we do have that, and it's based off of approximately 7,000 estimation from StatsCan of how many adults above 18 that we had in the community. So we'll circulate that around to council and provide it. Overall, though, it's not always about the result, it's about the process as well. So our engagement policy is based around reaching out. If you only have, in the case of one, you want more than one, but that's one person that took the time and effort to answer. And that's the same, I think it was Councillor Ryan that mentioned, even though it might only be 133, that's 133 people in our community that took the 8 minutes on average to fill out a survey, and that's not insignificant. Of course, we always like more than less. That gives us a stronger sense of what's going on, but the number isn't always the thing that we focus on. It's digging into that data and seeing what it can tell us.
Councillor Cummins.
Thank you. So I'm not disparaging the activity. The activity is very important. The reason why I'm asking for statistical sample size is I look differently at the results of an analysis based on that number. Not devaluing the 133 responses, but you need to look at those 133 responses differently depending on where they fall on that spectrum. Just as important, even where we fall on that spectrum is important. And maybe it's just I've had a lot of training and experience in statistics that I look at it that way. Every piece of data is important. You'll see I have a plethora of notes on this data because it is super important information that we're getting. I like to weigh that information more accurately, that's all. So I'm not disputing the fact public engagement, we all know, is super important. I've heard many councillors at this table say you can't lead, or you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And that is seriously a concern with surveys like this, where we want so much great information from the public, but when we present it to them, they're not taking advantage of that themselves. I know Deputy Mayor Blatz has mentioned that to me before, and I'm 100% on that. So I just want to have an idea of where on the spectrum to look at the data, not discounting the data, and I appreciate all of the support for the data collection process that I'm hearing here today. Absolutely super important. I just would like to know how to look at the data a little bit more accurately. But I'd really appreciate that, Director Wagstaff, or sorry, Acting CAO Wagstaff, to get that information from you. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Any further comments or questions? Okay, then I would look for someone to make a motion to accept this report for information. Councillor Wilson?
I motion that we accept the Citizen Budget Survey 2021 as presented by Director Lindeman on November 1 as information.
Thank you for that. I will call the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you so much. Sorry, that moves us along to item number 8, which is adjournment for today's meeting. Sorry, Harvey, would you? Councillor Walsh. Thank you so much. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thanks you so much, folks. This has been a good meeting. Have a good day, and this meeting is officially adjourned.